Welcome to Family Life. Welcome to Divorce Intervention Protocol. Helping a couple answer the question, is divorce my best and only choice? I think for all of us, it's a critical question to answer. In mine and Allison's case, we're currently working with a couple in Colorado, and we requested that we have no further discussion with them until after this training. And I've already talked to two people this morning who are in the same place with another couple. The reality is our culture says divorce is an answer, and it certainly is, but it's not the only answer.
Amen.
So anyway, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but the reality is this is an upfront and personal training for all of us. And so we are pleased to have Dr. Russ Berg with us here this morning to provide some training. This training is available in two formats. One is a day-and-a-half training. The other is a mini clinic, which we do in about 4 hours. So today you're going to experience the mini clinic. You will get all the key components that you need to execute this well in the ministry that God's given you. Dr. Russ Berg, I love you. I love working with you. He is passionate. He is more interested in you than you could ever imagine. He is a people person, pastor for 37 years, incredible marriage, great family, and looking forward to have the opportunity to speak into us. So I want to pray, turn it over to Dr. Russ Berg, and then we'll get started. Father, I thank you just for who you are, for bringing this training here. 2.5 years, Lord, I've been waiting to bring this training to our team. And I just ask that you would, in your perfect timing, make it what it needs to be in all our lives.
Yes.
That you would give us favor as we interact with couples, that you would give us wisdom and discernment. And Lord, would you bring those people to us who are trying to answer the question, is divorce their best and only option? Lord, I ask that you would be just with your spirit, you would speak and work through Dr. Berg today. And I ask, Lord, that as we listen, that we would hear from you what you have for us. It's for your glory that we meet. It's for your glory that we're in the fight. And Lord, we want a different America. So may it start with us. We trust you for it. In Jesus' name, amen. Please welcome Dr. Russ Berg.
Thank you, Mike. Now I just rerouted my microphone. What an honor and a privilege to be, at Family Life. That's huge. I'm a pastor from up north, and when we say business casual and it's 7 degrees below zero in my hometown, this is business casual. But I'm really honored to be among my peers, people who are in the trenches fighting for marriages. And I want to thank you for taking the time to be here. I want to thank the generosity of Family Life that made it possible. And again, Sean and the whole team, there's just so much behind. Nobody wants to get patted on the back. You know this, right? We Christians have a false sense of humility. Oh, don't thank me, it's for the Lord. But Paul takes the whole last chapter of the book of Romans, doesn't he? And he said, remember so-and-so. And Paul remembers names, and he remembers what they did for the sake of the gospel. And Paul goes down and says, thank you, thank you, thank you. So I want to thank you for being here. And just a couple really quick housekeeping things. For those of you on blood pressure medication, there are 3 breaks, amen? Isn't God good? The other one comes at 10:20, and we'll let you know. The other housekeeping thing is that there is a CD of a new and up-and-coming, sweet, godly Christian artist that's on your table. You can dive into the middle and fight over it, or in a more orderly process, you can just assign someone to be your table coach, because we're going to have some things where you're going to need to kind of do a little work together, and I'm assuming that that table coach is going to really work for that CD, okay? Amen? So you can just take a little minute right now. Here's what I want you to do as we're starting. Around your table, the person who's had the most recent traffic violation, you're the table leader. And then what I want you to do is really quick, really quick. We are all doing good work for the kingdom. We are all in places that, and I love how Mike describes it, we're in the family marriage space. And that sounds exotic, doesn't it? Oh, I work with families. I'm in the marriage family space. And as Bill and I were talking this weekend, sometimes it feels like we're standing 10 feet from the falls, doesn't it? And people are going by us. They are flowing by us, and we'll grab onto one and we'll slip away from another. And you carry this weight sometimes of couples who are in process, of couples who are coming toward you. You can feel overwhelmed, saying, how in the world, God, are we going to reach them? You grieve some that let go of you as you've been pouring your life into them. Amen? So in all of those different places, what I want you to do is I want you just real quick, introduce each other, and then I want you to just quickly pray for your table. God, help us. Help us learn, get what you want for us this morning. Okay? On your mark, get set, go. Okay. Finish up your prayer time. It's a sweet thing, isn't it, to be together with other fellow servants and fellow crisis marriage intervention people. It's not a bad thing to have God's word, is it? Especially because this thing's going to go fast. But I've been kind of living in Psalm 34 preparation. You remember that weird time when David had to act crazy, you know, with Abimelech? David gets into a jam, and he does what comes natural to people under stress. They do crazy. Anybody have a couple like that? You just do crazy. And yet he writes this: I will extol the Lord at all times. His praise will always be on my lips. That's the default of our hearts today as we start. But then in verse 2, my soul will boast in the Lord. Some of you have a boast here. You've got a God story. You've got to spike the ball in the end zone. God's working. A couple is coming along, right? And then some of you have let the afflicted hear and rejoice. Some of you, as we talked about, carry that burden of feeling like you're 10 feet from the falls. But here's what I really ministered to me, that was the next verse. Glorify the Lord with me, and let us exalt his name together. So whether you're carrying a blessing or a burden, all of us are in the right place this morning. We will do this together. We will encourage one another together. I'd like to just start by take your manual for just a second. I just want you to see what you have. And on page 2, you know, there's a table of contents. Let me show you, because this is a mini clinic, and, you know, Mike set this up so well. Because it's a mini clinic, let me show you what we're going to get to and what we're not going to get to. Here's I think the importance of the manual that you have in your hand. The whole protocol, including what we are not going to be able to get to because of time today, is scripted. So that if what we get to today starts to click and get some traction with you, and for many of you, some of this will be intuitive. Some of you actually will go through the protocol and I'm already doing this, or I'm doing it in a way that I think is more effective. We are just months away from refurbishing and updating our manual, so I would so appreciate your comments and your suggestions as veterans, okay? Make sense? So in what we call lesson 1, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the origin story. How did this protocol develop? You can read about it. It was a God thing. Here's just my little caveat over here. When God starts moving in your ministries and in your sphere of influence in ways that you step back and go, Lord, it had to be you. Here's my encouragement. Document it. With confidentiality, document what God has done. Look at the patterns. See if you can pull out anything that can become a power story or an encouragement to those who are coming behind you. And for those of us who have more or less hair than I do, we need to be training the next generation to do this work. If we're going to be starting a movement to push back and to change the culture of divorce in America, we have to be training multi-levels of generations to be able to do divorce intervention screening and divorce intervention work that helps prepare crisis marriages for a handoff to a solid Christian counselor. Make sense? Okay, so you can see some of the things we're going to go through. Lesson 1 and 2 and 3 we're going to go through. 3 we will not get to. I'll explain what's in there. You'll pick it up at the end of today. It'll be intuitive. But then just look at the appendix on page 2. We've got some templates in there for you. So for example, the one that says phone session template, that's a one-sheet summary that when you are taking the call for help, you're meeting with one person, someone's reached out to you, it's either a phone call or, as we're going to practice here a little bit later, it's a one-on-one or one-on-two conversation. We're going to encourage you to use that sheet as a template. Some of you are really structured people. This is intuitive to you. You'd never go anywhere without a legal pad. Some of you are like me, not so much. And, the Spirit of God will tell me when I'm supposed to remember when I get there. I have learned in this work, I don't do that. I've done this protocol with over 350 couples. I never sit in front of a couple, whether it's in a coffee shop or in my office, without the summary of the materials in front of me. Why? Because I know, and you know, if I have prayer, and I have a process, and I have a plan, when I'm with a couple that is out of control, I can have peace and not panic because I know where to go. Even if the process stops and the conversation stops and we've got to take it up later, I know exactly where we stopped. I can take notes. I can pray for them intelligently, reflect back. Okay, does this kind of make sense? Okay. Let me ask you a question. When you get nervous with a couple, and I know this probably relates to so few of you because we are all veterans in the trenches, right? When you kind of get nervous, what do that you're going, oh, I wish I didn't do that? Anybody? Talk too much? What else?
Offer the solutions.
Offer the solutions. What else? What else do we do? Be condemning. Yep.
Speak cliches.
Pardon?
Speak cliches.
Oh, yes. Speak cliches. Yep. Surface feels much better. And especially if you're sitting in front of the couple and you know them and you're going, part of your brain's going, oh, my goodness, you run our women's ministry. And I don't think I've ever seen your husband in church before. We're not saying this, right? This is from a pastor perspective, okay? Oh, I don't think we've ever seen your husband before. Yeah, I'm so glad you're here. We do things when we're nervous. When I get nervous and I'm teaching in front of people, I do something with this arm, okay? Just want to let you know so you don't think that there's, mini stroke going on or something. I have had a mini stroke, but this is not. I had a guy from my congregation come up 5 years after I've been in the pulpit. He's a doctor. He's an MA. He's a doctor's assistant. I go in for a sinus infection. I haven't seen him in a year. And he goes, Pastor Russ, he goes, oh, I missed when you were doing that thing with your arm, you know, and he's doing it, and I'm going, oh, that's creepy. I wish that. So the two things right off the bat, you'll see me doing this, or you'll see me repeat this phrase. Does this make sense? Okay, so if you think of a really cool substitute for, does this make sense? Just kind of text it to Bill, okay? And Bill will go, nah, he won't say that. All right. That's my wife, Melody. We've been married 44 years. She would say it's the 35 happiest years of our life. Like many of you, we know what it's like to be in ministry, to be in full-time ministry and feel like, why am I counseling other families in our church when both of us are in this space where I'm looking at my watch going, oh, I got to go home. Mel's at home and hears the garage door go up with our two kids and goes, oh, he's home. We know what that's like. By God's grace, we got some really good help. Actually, some people like you were first responders in that moment for us and helped us get the professional Christian help we needed. And so now we've got 5 grandkids, and Hunka Burnin' Love did find Drop Dead Gorgeous. One of the things you and I know is that the couples that are coming to us, they may have had a great wedding. They may have had very, very faulty preparation. And so that preparation, that lack of it, that lack of a sense of what a marriage should even be kind of follows them. The challenge in our culture, and I'm going to go through these quick because this is, you know this. Sociologists talk about the me marriage. Marriages have turned in our culture to the place where it is not about us, it's about personal fulfillment. We talk about the consumer marriage. Today, I was reading an article this last week that you can actually file for and pick up your marriage license in Las Vegas. Where? In the baggage claim at the airport. Now just stop and think about that for a minute. You're picking up your marriage license in the baggage claim. Isn't that ironic? Sociologists also talk about 5-year renewable contracts. Lifelong marriage in our culture is not the view. Or we talk about the starter marriage. Where do you think we borrowed that phrase from? How many of you have been in real estate? Right? Everybody knows what the starter home is, correct? It's too small. It's what we could afford. I don't really like it, and I'm looking for a what? I'm looking for an upgrade. That's why Zillow is so popular. Okay? Here's how that translates into relationship culture that affects and impacts marriages. And I want to be really careful because if you fell in love on eharmony.com, I don't want you to hate me this early in the training. And I know Neil Clark Warren is a great guy. I think taught at Fuller Seminary. But eharmony.com, it's not the only one, has a patently untrue advertisement line. And it goes like this. We have helped more Christian couples find their perfect soulmate than any other site. So they're talking about matching, chemistry, all of that's important. Here's the problem. The soulmate is a myth. It's not biblical at all. It comes from Greek mythology. Soulmates are not discovered. They're developed over a lifetime of love and faithfulness and commitment. And so if I bought into the soulmate myth and the starter marriage, I just kind of picked lower on the scale than I should have. And so if the marriage becomes difficult, if we just can't seem to work it out, today it's, no harm, no foul. 50% of us get it wrong. It's okay. We almost become empathetic. We can still stay friends. You've heard this? We can still stay friends. Here's the problem. If you buy into the myth of the soulmate, your resume is always out, either here or in here. You're looking for an upgrade. You're looking for an upgrade. The challenge in our churches is churches often have no marriage discipleship plan. We solemnize marriages. We have no well thought out biblical plan to do 3 things for our marriages: to start them well with good premarital education, to strengthen them and help good marriages get better in this middle section, and then to create a safety net when they struggle. We find out about crisis marriages too late in the church. Why? The new church attendance normal, right? Twice a month. At least up by us. From what I'm reading, what I see, it's twice a month because of all kinds of reasons. People working 2 jobs, blended families where the ex will not let you take your kids to the church. And so if people aren't in community, if they're not in small group, it can be months before we put things together like, oh, well, Sue's here with the kids. I don't think anything of that because John works every other weekend or he travels. Or I saw John here with the kids and maybe Sue's at a soccer tournament with their older. So we just don't put it together that we don't see the couples. Does this make sense? And sometimes then when we try to engage after it's been months, the spouse that is not sure about the marriage has a very difficult time leaning back into this community that, and you'll excuse me for this is a non-evangelical term, fawning over the spouse that stayed in the church, supporting them, encouraging them, and as you'll see in the protocol, and you know this, we have to be really, really careful because until we sit down with a couple and go through the protocol, my experience is I'm not always sure who wants to save the marriage. Sometimes the person that's come to you and is waving the flag saying, I want to save the marriage, I want to save the marriage, actually has no intention of working on the marriage. They want to be viewed in your church as the person who wanted to save the marriage. How does that land on you? Does that seem too harsh? They've already fallen in love with that cute little worship director over there. Unsure how to engage both spouses. Many of you already do this well. Hopefully we can give you some more tools. How do I hold, and this is what we will call the mixed agenda couple. Other counseling psychologists call this the polarized couple. One wants to stay married and one doesn't. We'll give you language and we'll give you some structure. And for many of you, this will just be a refresher. This is what you do intuitively. You've already honed some of these skills. And then uncertain and unhelpful referrals. Pastors oftentimes do uncertain and unhelpful referrals because they'll take a business card from someone they've never met. They'll slide it to a person and go, here's someone who does marriage counseling. 85% of the licensable psychology degrees in the United States do some kind of marriage counseling. Only 15% of them, by their own national survey, have had any supervised training in helping couples stay together. You roll the dice and you're taking a huge chance. If you have not met that therapist, you don't understand their heart, their theology, their process, and you don't understand or just have some kind of assurance from them that they're what we would call, just kind of describe, a marriage-friendly therapist. A therapist, a Christian counselor that at their primary goal up here on the table for them is, if at all possible, we want to help try to save the marriage. And you will have opportunities where you've worked so hard with a couple. You've been there in front of the falls, right? You've pulled them out. You've gotten them to the shore. And you hand them off to someone who goes, you're in a lot of distress. And this is almost a quote from a Christian counselor up in our area to a couple that I referred. Maybe the distress and the depression that you're struggling with is because you don't have the courage to admit that you don't want to stay in your marriage. This is what Dr. Doherty from the University of Minnesota calls therapist-assisted marital suicides. Because the professional has just pronounced the relationship DOA. They don't intend to. They are trying. They love people. They don't get paid a lot. They love people. But by taking that, by doing exactly the opposite of what you're going to learn how to do, they align themselves with one person. And now this couple goes out into the parking lot and has another conversation. We just spent $175 for you to understand it's over. What part of that don't you get? And the person who wanted to save the marriage can be devastated. The only place that does not need this protocol is, and this is probably a lot like my first church, Lego Baptist Church. All the relationships are perfect. All of the marriages just look great. And now for some good news. The divorce decision is more fluid than commonly thought. These are not in your things. We have not incorporated these slides into your. What do I mean by this? The common consensus that your couples, Christian couples, are absorbing into their thinking is that once we talk about divorce, it's all over. You've seen wonderful, incredible exceptions to that, but the culture pushes them this way. Here's what the research indicates. Up to 35%, and this is only speaking from the largest county in Minneapolis, where I live. Up to 35% of the couples that file for divorce that have small children have one or both spouses that don't want the divorce, don't know what else to do, and are open to court-offered or faith-based offered help to see if there's hope for the relationship. Second is, you can give hope to a struggling couple. You already know that. Isn't that incredible? When you just see the countenance change. I'm so humbled at that moment when I see God show up. You know, there's a part of me, you kind of keep it at bay, your non-anxious presence. God, if you don't show up, nothing's going to happen. And you see the turning of the heart. You see the softening of the heart. Here's the other one I really like. Working with crisis marriages opens up conversations for the gospel. It's a great story. Won't go into just a little bit of it. I got on the shuttle to go to the airport from my house. Last seat left. Sat next to a gal who's a little bit older than my oldest daughter. We didn't talk for half of the rides, about an hour and 15 minutes from my place to MSP. And then she starts talking about, we're going to go down to Orlando. We're doing a party for our parents. They both turned 70. It's a surprise party. We're going to go into their community, and it's going to be great. I said, you're an incredible daughter. I said, that just sounds so cool. And she turns to me and says, what do you do for a living? Now she was in trouble. We just talked just very gently, and I didn't, you know this. I'm glad you're sitting down. This comes as a shock to you, but sometimes I just need to have better pacing. You know, I never had a thought that came in my head I didn't want to share, and so you got to have a filter for that. So Holy Spirit kind of gave me a filter and didn't talk very long, and she just opened up and said, we've been divorced 5 years, but my ex and I have recently been talking about that we think we made a mistake. And so I just said, maybe God's up to something. I didn't know whether she had faith or not, but you know what? I'm an apostle of hope. I can't not. When God opens the door, I can't not speak of the hope. Amen? Right? So I talked to her just a little bit about, hey, you get this. Horizontal reconciliation, an affair can break a relationship or strain it. Sin causes this. And when you can help a person understand through this protocol how they got here, they're oftentimes open to taking that knowledge and flipping it this way, because now it makes a little bit more sense that a holy God and a sinful human being have a broken relationship. But here's the good news. God is the Heavenly Father. God's the spouse that's taken 1,000 steps in our direction and stands there at the foot of the cross and says, come home. And suddenly the horizontal and the vertical come together in a conversation over a broken marriage. I think I would encourage you, ask the Spirit of God to help your antenna go up for those redemptive conversations. So what is divorce intervention? It's a structured, disciplined interview process that we will lay out, and you'll get a chance to see it on video. You'll get a chance to see it role-played. For most of you, I would be very surprised if this kind of way of working with people is not intuitive for you. It is not therapy. What's the difference? The difference is in divorce intervention counseling, if you Googled it, it's also called discernment counseling. You're not solving any problems. Therapy is about helping the couple find solutions. This, if you think of the medical parallel, a first responder does not hand out gym memberships, right? A first responder coming up on a motorcycle accident where there's been, there's bleeding, there's tragic woundedness, it's just a mess. They don't lecture the person on the pavement why they didn't have a helmet, right? They don't give them coupons for the motorcycle parts place and go, dude, you could have avoided all this. They have one job. Their job is to help stabilize the person who's here and help them to be willing to go get the help that they need for the next stage. Discernment counseling is counseling before the counseling. Does that make sense? And many couples who enter into therapy without getting on the same page, without answering this one question, have we thought through and have we become convinced that maybe divorce isn't our best and our only option? It's very difficult for them to do well in counseling if they're on two different pages. Who is it for? It's for people who need their perspectives. This is in your manual, so I'm going to go a little quicker here. People who are considering divorce, but they're not completely sure if it's the right path. What is your purpose? To help the couple discern which path is best for them? It's to help the couple discern. Did you get the difference? Why? Because and some of us have a little stronger personalities. You know the light at the end of the tunnel is an oncoming train. You just know it from experience, from working with couples. You can feel this welling up in you. You can see this. You've gone through this with your kids, with other couples. But if you and I talk our couples into something, we work hard to convince them, and they haven't gone through the process themselves. Anything we can talk them into, someone else can talk them out of. Why? Because they leave the space where you've been working with them and they go out into a world where they've got cheerleaders and condemners. They've got two sides, right? There are people who are telling them, you're a terrible Christian if you do this. Our church is going to have spiritual discipline if you guys go through with this. There are going to be other people who go, we love you, but you're just miserable. We get it. We're about marriage too, but you guys are just miserable. You guys have been fighting ever since we've known you. Your purpose is not to discern which path the couple should take, even though you and I know from Scripture. Here, let me maybe nuance it this way. You and I know what God said about a healthy relationship. But what we don't know what path is God taking them on to get there. And we can't presume to know that. Does that make sense? Because I've been in so many church meetings, we're running a little bit thin on time. All in favor of letting you do this exercise on your own, say aye. Here's what this exercise is about. We all have default things that we fall into when working with couples that aren't healthy. You can see a list of them there. You can identify with them, okay? Feeling the need to rescue them. Part of this is if you didn't have some of this going on in you, you wouldn't be in the place. God would not entrust you with that hard space with couples unless you had some of this. The key is, and we'll talk about this, what is a non-anxious presence? It's okay for me to feel like I need to rescue them. Part of that's compassion. But I need to remember two numbers, 2 and 4. You and I are responsible to people, but not for them. We're responsible to people, but not for them. People are responsible for themselves, and ultimately God's responsible for them. So you guys can walk through those, and actually you can probably give it to a neighbor, because many of you probably go through the checklist and go, I don't think any of these are things I struggle with. It wouldn't surprise me. Great. Okay, let's talk about the confidence. My confidence is that this kind of work with couples is a calling. You know this. Here's the scripture I would encourage you to not only to read, but to think about. And just this phrasing, it jumped out at me the more I started to do this. The church has been given the message and the ministry of reconciliation. So being in marriage reconciliation space is a calling from God. And I would suggest to your thinking, it is one of the clearest outworkings of the gospel. For the reason that I talked about before, it helps connect the vertical and the horizontal. But here's the other thing. When you and I do this kind of crisis intervention well, I really believe we look like Jesus. I really believe this is what Jesus would do with conflicted couples. Here's the first responder's posture, a non-anxious presence. That's a kind of a technical term that means this. All of us can have anxiety over working with a couple. If you didn't care, you wouldn't do it. But non-anxious presence means that I'm self-aware of the anxiety and a little bit of nervousness that I have looking at you. I care about you, and you know this gets really heightened when this is our kids. Some of us have had this conversation with our own children, our own daughter and son-in-law. Some of us had this conversation with neighbors, with coworkers. We need to not add our anxiety to theirs. They're already anxious enough. An impartial but not neutral posture. What does that mean? That means that I'm making a commitment and I'm working really hard to hold both spouses that are in front of me, both what we call the leaning out and the leaning in spouse. The leaning in spouse is fighting to save the marriage. The leaning out spouse is fighting to get out of the marriage. But to hold both of them with, and I love this phrase that Bill gave me, with unconditional positive regard. What does this mean? And I speak this to the couple. I speak it into them. Guys, I want you to know, regardless of the decision, regardless of what happens from our meetings, I want you to know something. I want you to know two things. One, God is for you. And I want you to know I'm for you. I'm for both of you. And I will work the very hardest I can so that both of you feel held and respected and loved, regardless of where you are, even if you are still contemplating very hard, unhealthy things. That's hard for us, isn't it? In fact, as we work with this protocol for 2 years with a think tank, with pastors and counselors, we kind of came to the conclusion we want to get therapists or professional counselors to push their convictions about the importance of marriage forward a little bit, and we need Christian leaders to pull their convictions back, not change them, just don't lead with them. Don't lead with here's the sheet of 10 verses of why God hates divorce. God doesn't hate divorced people, okay? The ability to really hear both spouses. And this means that structuring the dialogue so both of them can speak in their own voice without being interrupted is part of that conversation. Facilitator of dialogue and not debate. Two biblical examples that just really resonate with me. This fuels the passion to work with the couples that I do. That story in John 11 where Jesus is right in the middle of the dynamic of many of the marriages that we end up with, right? The religious leaders are casting blame, and there's a woman who is filled with shame. Jesus does not. Here's what's interesting. What he does not do, he does not launch into a sermon on why the teachers of the law completely misunderstand the Old Testament. Where is the man? This is just go back and read it, you know. We found this woman taken in the act of adultery. Just how exactly does that happen? Are you part of a sting operation? Are you peeking in windows at night? How exactly do you catch someone in the... So if I'm Jesus and I know for sure, I'm not guessing, I know for sure the possibilities of how this whole ruse happened because they didn't care anything about the woman. They were trying to trap Jesus. He doesn't spend any time condemning them, and he doesn't spend any time condemning the woman. But what he does do is he what? Kneels down on the ground and starts doing what? Have you heard a sermon on what Jesus wrote on the ground that the Bible doesn't tell us? I've heard a couple of really, they're funny, but they're useless because, writing on the ground, I think if it was important, it would have been recorded in the text for us. What Jesus is doing, he is slowing down the conversation, and he is in the middle as the calm, non-anxious presence, holding both the teachers of the law and the woman with grace. And so he turns to them and says, if you're without sin, cast the first stone. The oldest leave. He doesn't go, and hey, check on that biblical passage in the Old Testament you guys screwed up when you did this. I don't want to see this again. And when everyone else leaves, he says to the woman, where are your accusers? Isn't it a beautiful thing? Jesus did not count himself among the woman's accuser, given her lifestyle. Luke 15, oh man, I keep a picture in my New Testament. It's Rembrandt's Return of the Prodigal. We give this to every couple we work with. Very famous painting we stole off the internet, and the internet said you couldn't get in trouble if you stole it off the internet, so I hope that's true. But if you've seen that picture, it has the father, the son, the older. So you're asking yourself these three questions every time you walk past that. Am I like the father giving grace? Am I like the prodigal in need of grace? Or am I like the older brother withholding grace? And a lot of times your spouses will kind of fall into that. I've taken that picture and I've just slid it into the middle. And it drops. Two kinds of couples, okay? Same agenda means they're on the same page or they have the same direction. So that could be we either both want to save the marriage or we're both out. That could be a same agenda. Not many couples that are on this same agenda, we both want out, are going to come to you asking for help. So there's a same agenda couple. We just are struggling, but we want you to help us. The mixed agenda couple is one wants to save the marriage and one doesn't. The reason it's important to make that distinction is because in the fuller development of this protocol, we spend a little bit of time individually with those spouses, but we address different sets of issues. The leaning out spouse has a different set of concerns and needs a different conversation than the leaning in spouse. But you've also got some couples where one of the spouses is leaning out, and the things we hear from the spouse, this is the one who feels more hopeless, and not only feels hopeless, like things won't change, but lacks motivation, okay? So in your manual, this might help for you to follow. I think in your manual, this is on page 6. I don't love my spouse anymore. I have peace about the decision to divorce. Anybody heard that? The Christian version of that, it's what we call the Christian fatally flawed marriage, okay? And one spouse usually falls backward on the sword of grace, all right, and says, something I knew, this is really my fault. This is really my fault. I knew I was out of the will of God. I knew, and I hate even to hear this. I knew you weren't a believer when we married. And I put so much pressure on you to become a believer. And their thinking now is to get into the will of God, I've got to undo what I did, get divorced, and now I want to go out and find one of those eHarmony.com spouses, because really the pride underline of here, in the kingdom of God, I'm a solid 8.5. I shouldn't have to live with a 4.3 that has a spiritual gifts deficit. They have the peace, and their spouse that they're walking away from has the pieces. God's a God of love. He will forgive me if I file for divorce. You've seen this. I've had, and I get it. This is not condemnation, but they'll look straight at me and they'll go, I know that I'm wrong. I know that I'm sinning. God wants me to be happy. It'll all be okay. Subtitle, He'll forgive me. My spouse will never change. The leaning in spouse is the one who's more hopeful, trying to save the marriage. Phrases we hear, I've made a lot of mistakes, but I want to change. I can't believe he wants me to leave. I had no idea how unhappy he is. I will do anything to keep this marriage together. Question, seasoned couples workers. Is that a good reason? I will do anything to keep this marriage together. On its face, that's good, isn't it? That on its face, it sounds like determination. But you got to be really careful. Why? Because underneath that, I might be tempted to say, I'm going to do unhealthy things. I'm going to accept all the responsibility. I'm going to fill in the blank. So the leaning in spouse, that little phrase, one of the characteristics of the spouse that's desperately trying to save the marriage, is oftentimes engaged in behaviors that actually serve to push their spouse farther out. Does that make any sense? And so one of the things that as you work with couples, just even to have that language, which one is leaning in, from my sense, which one is leaning out? Because they have very different agendas. In a kind of in a summary thing, my goal up here through the protocol, by God's grace, I want to see if I can get the leaning in spouse to stop pushing, to stop threatening, cajoling, blaming, condemning. I want them to start taking care of themselves and their own walk with God. I want them to stop behaviors that are demeaning to them, stop accepting total responsibility. It's counterintuitive to them because they think all of these behaviors, all of these anxious behaviors are going to serve. And you remember James Dobson years ago in Love Must Be Tough. You remember that little example he said when the bird's banging against the door of the cage, you've got to let the door open. Why? Because people have to want to stay in a relationship. They can't be coerced to stay in a relationship. And that's one of the things that a leaning in spouse oftentimes is desperately trying to do. They don't want to do, but those desperate things are things that come natural to us when we don't feel like we have any other options. We kind of divide it up into two buckets, hard and soft reasons for marital distress. Hard reasons are harmful, dangerous patterns of behavior that threaten the security and the safety of marriage partners and their family. They almost all start with A: abuse, abandonment, addictions, anger, adultery. I would add in here, because pastors are always adding stuff, an assortment of mental health challenges. Now, here's what I want you to hear about hard reasons for divorce, hard reasons for marital distress. One of the primary things that is important to understand is that when you're working with this couple and when a counselor's working with them, hard reasons generally reside in the behavior or the circumstance of one person. It doesn't mean there aren't contributing factors. It doesn't mean there aren't. So, for example, if I was struggling with an unhealthy relationship with alcohol, the choice to drink is my choice, right? Melody there could be all kinds of reasons. Melody could like me if I've drunk too much because maybe I'm happier. Maybe I'm less stressed. There might be tension and friction in our home. And I don't know about you, you're so much more civilized down here in Arkansas. Up in Minnesota, we have a thing called the beer fridge out in the garage. And, you know, it's next to your hunting gear and it's next to your sled dog. And when you get stressed, you go out to the beer fridge. There may be circumstances that make it easier for your particular addiction, but it's not the other spouse's fault. But the other spouse may need to look at how is this environment contributing to one of us struggling. Here's the other thing that's really important. for this couple to really get the help that they need, just even acknowledging it's okay for one of you to have a hard reason. You may have a little bit bigger ball to push up the hill. You might need some additional help, and that's all good. My language with a couple, so let's say I'm working with and she starts to, oh, he's always drinking. And the guy pushes back. We'll show you in the protocol. You don't engage in becoming an addictions counselor. Why? You have no idea how that alcohol functions in their home. You can have convictions about what's healthy and unhealthy. It makes no sense to ask that person how much they drink. That is actually, for the purposes of this, irrelevant. What is relevant is, can I help the leaning out spouse that has this hard reason? Number one, can I help them understand they still matter even though they're struggling with this? They still matter even if they had an affair. They still matter even if they've gone to treatment twice. They matter infinitely to God, and right now in this moment, they matter to me. I don't have to agree with the person's perspective. I can still affirm him or her as a person. And that's really important for the person that is struggling with hard reasons for marital distress. Soft problems are everything else. I don't want you to focus on in or out spouses. I want you to focus on what things that's said to you, hard and soft reasons. Soft reasons, we all contribute. We can all do this. Hard reasons may be rooted in a challenge that one of them's carrying. That's a burden. What do you think? Thoughts? Let's do this a little bit differently. Let's do it around your tables, okay? Around your tables, and then we're right up against a break. So do this for a couple of minutes. Analyze it. Give me your best 2 answers that someone's going to feed. Mike said, okay, after they're done, they just go for a 10-minute break. Protocol for the mixed agenda couple, page 38, the 3-page summary. See where it says cheat sheet, 3rd line down, that's page 43. Session notes, there's a form in there for you. Some of you don't need it, but some of you would like it. It's a form. Every time you sit with a couple, you've got a template to take notes. And couple exit survey, probably about half of the time. I don't get to this all the time, but I usually like to ask a couple whether they decide to go forward with working on their marriage or not. I like to send them a survey to ask them, how did they experience that time with me? And then sample lines of communication are page 47. Okay? I'm not going to cover it a lot, but it's in your, this is in your manual. It's a section on confidentiality. You know this. Let me just throw you out one suggestion. Family Life, I think, has protocol. If you've worked with couples, you know the importance of confidentiality. I just want you to be aware. I'll just remind you, because I know that you're aware. Nothing can undermine your work with a conflicted couple more than them feeling that the information they share with you is not safe. And for those of us in support ministry, we all raise our own support. I'm under a little bit of pressure every month, right? Okay, or every 2 months if you're irregularly regular. You're sending out your thing to your ministry supporters, and you want that power story, right? And you got to be really careful that it is generic. It has the approval. I always ask. I never put generic stuff in any of my written communication to my supporters that has names, geography, any kind of details that would give it away. And when it's scrubbed as anonymous but useful as I can, I always ask their permission. And if they say no, and their permission, I just did this with a group of couples that were giving us power stories because it was 3 or 4 years old. I went back and asked them, and 2 of the couples said, please don't use our story right now. We're not doing well. Oh, thank you. Thank you for telling me that. You need to honor that, okay? And you all know that, so I'll just, we'll let that be. If you'd like to know a little bit more, I would encourage you, if you're doing a lot of this work within the context of Family Life, make sure you follow their protocol for confidentiality. Okay? Okay, let's talk about the structure of the protocol. Let me just go back and make sure I didn't miss. Great. Okay, where we are is page 7. So everybody look up here for a minute. I just want to give you the visual of how this flows. It starts with a call for help, and you're dealing with generally with one person, one spouse, and we're going to practice this around the tables. One spouse reaches out for help, and the goal here is to work with this spouse in about a 15 to 20 minute phone conversation and support them, encourage them, but do not allow them to dump their half of the story. And I'll tell you why. You want to encourage them ultimately to invite their spouse to come in to be in front of both of you. Okay? You want both spouses to come in. You'll see in the protocol, we give people language to do that because if you've reached out for help, we help you understand, we give you a little bit, just enough to say, God's in this, you're going to help me, but I want spouses to go back to their spouse that's really hesitant, or maybe it doesn't want to come, with integrity and say, Russ didn't let me share the whole story because he feels that both of us need to be heard at the same time, and I just want you to know that. Okay? This ask at this phone call protocol is really important because a lot of times couples go back and they ask their spouse, well, I found a counselor, you got to go to mine because I went to yours. Or we're desperate, and we'll help you with that. You've got to give people language that is language of humility, language of brokenness, and language of softness in order to try to create the best opportunity for a spouse that's leaning out to want to lean back in. So there's a call for help, okay? Lord willing, that leads to an ask for both spouses to be sitting in front of you. And what you and I are going to do is to walk them through a guided conversation of what we call the conflict narrative. This is on page 7 in your manual. How did you get here? The repair narrative. What have you tried in the past to solve these issues? And what are the very best times in your relationship? Now that's broad, so let me tease that out a little bit. So in this together conversation, I want to lead them through, and for some of you who do HR, this is intuitive. You do this, or you did do this if you were in the business world before you came to FL. This is not rocket science. How'd you get into this? What happens when you've tried to fix it, right? When were you doing it right? Okay, so in the context of this, those broad themes sound like this. We're going to give each spouse the opportunity through their own voice, without interruption and without correction and condemnation. We're going to give each spouse the opportunity in a safe place, in a clear, calm, concise way, Christ-like way, speaking the truth in love, to be able to say from their perspective what has happened to them. If they were helping me answer the question, and I'll phrase it this way for them. Sandy, help me understand. And they're talking to me at this point. I don't have them talking to each other. I have them talking to me. Sandy, help me understand. In the whole of your relationship, not just the whole of your married life, in the whole of your relationship, what have been the major reasons from your perspective that your marriage is in so much trouble? And then I learned the lesson of the zipper. Silence is okay. Why? Because this person is thinking up here not only of those things that you just asked them, but they're also thinking, are you safe enough for me? Have I stamped your emotional passport? Is it safe enough for me to share this with you? And you just receive whatever. And then you ask, Steve, I'd really like to hear and I'm looking at Steve. My body language says, Steve, help me understand from your perspective, over the length of your relationship, what's happened to your marriage to bring you to the place so much in trouble. Their narratives are not going to be the same. Just get ready for it. It's not. This is not about who's right and who's wrong. There's right and wrong behavior in that narrative. This is not about sorting through that. This is about letting them get it out and be heard. Does that make sense? What have you tried to solve? What have you tried in the past to solve these problems? There's only 3 answers to that question, right? We tried nothing. And you've sat with couples who, they're married 15 years. They've never gone to counseling. You can go in one direction in a response, right? There's something that wells up inside of you that goes, you didn't care enough to go get help? You didn't know Family Life was in Little Rock, where you live in North Little Rock? You didn't know we were here? Sorry, that was a poor northern. You feel that, right? Didn't you care? Didn't you care enough to go get help? Or you can go in exactly the opposite direction in your thinking, and when you get a chance to just comment, especially on that marriage map, when you see this visualized. Steve and Jill, I'm looking here, and I saw that you didn't share any places where you got help. I can't imagine what that must have been like for you, how hard that must have been to not have gotten the help that you've needed. Now, why am I doing that? They may be missed. Their church maybe wanted to sponsor them. They may have turned down all. I want them to know that as I'm looking at, I'm not focused on what they didn't do. I'm focused on what could be ahead for them because they didn't get help. I'm trying to plant the seeds of what could your relationship become if you got godly help. I don't need to give them a Jesus spanking because they didn't care enough to go get counseling. Make sense? And then in the repair narrative, we've got one really important question that you'll come out. It's written in the script, and it goes like this. So both of them share, how did we get into this? Both of them share, what have we done? The counseling can be professional or personal. I said that there were 3 responses. One is we didn't get help. Second is we got help and it sucked. We were worse off. Spent a lot of money and it didn't help. I don't have to help them decipher why it didn't help. I just have to come alongside and say, wow, I've heard that a lot. The last one is they got help and it helped. They stopped going. Why is that a good information? People stop going to counseling for all kinds of reasons. They run out of money. They feel better. Okay, what do you do when you're on a 2-week round of antibiotics? You feel better on day 3, and what do? You stop taking it. Hey, we're good. We've got 2 of the 4 love languages down. We're good. You good, honey? Yeah, I'm good. We got okay soccer, and boy, it was kind of expensive and a little bit uncomfortable, and Bill and Jenny keep asking us those digging questions. We're good, aren't we? And why do I need to know that information? Because later on, I want to affirm to them, when you guys got help that resonated with you, it seems to me you were able to make progress. What am I doing? I'm gently pushing back against that narrative of hopelessness while I'm affirming their ability to lean into what God would have for them. This is the equivalent of the EMT out in the parking lot holding the kid whose head's been busted open in the motorcycle accident. You're going to make it. We're going to get you to the hospital. You're going to be okay. Let's make a little bit, I'm sorry, I forgot the one question that goes in the repair narrative. It's about children. The way that I think about this in my head and in my heart, in all of this, with a very soft heart on my part, I want this narrative conversation to be leading a couple through a mental and an emotional neighborhood that has all kinds of signs up that say children at play. Without any guilt, without any, don't you know how bad this is? Don't you know how screwed up kids come from? I don't need to do any of that. So we asked the question this way, and we worked on this question for a number of weeks to try to hone it. You may word it differently for purposes of practicing. We want you to use it now. You may actually have better language. The language that we use is this, and it's to each individual person. Steve, tell me where do your children land in this? What role do your children play in your decision making about the future of your marriage? Do you see how tentative that is? I didn't start out by saying, now you guys know that divorce is bad for kids, right? Even when you say that gently, I am risking pushing the leaning out spouse farther. Why? They already feel guilt. They already have had to construct in their mind a narrative about their children being okay to give them permission to leave the marriage. That make sense? So just tell me, what role do your children play in your decision making about the future of your marriage? I asked the wife, just assume you know those are going to be different. Why? The leaning in spouse wants to maximize that. The leaning out spouse wants to minimize that. That's totally okay. You listen to it and accept it. And then you're going to lead them. You're going to transition in this conversation. And you're basically going to say, best times narrative, sorry. Skipping a floppy disk up here, for those of you who are old enough to remember what floppy disks are. Here's the shift in the conversation. So you've gone through, how did we get here? What did we do? What role do our children play? We've been talking about some hard things. What I'd like to ask you now is I'd like you to tell me about some times in your relationship that are different. Best times or better times. Times when you felt a little, and use tentative language, you were a little more connected. Why? Because the leaning out spouse is looking for you to spike the ball in the end zone, right? When you were greatly in love, when you were on the mountaintop, and that narrative up here, I want to challenge it very gently. Times when you felt a little more connected. Okay? Why is this important? Because there's first of all, it's important to help reconnect them, especially on this map, to the footprints of God in their relationship. Where has God already shown up? Why do they need to remember that? Because at some level, if they're both hopeless, they've been pushing back or covering or forgetting, or however it happens, that God is powerful and God is for them, and God is a God of reconciliation and forgiveness. So I'm just curious about that. What were the times like? I have numerous couples who will say that the times their relationship was the best is before children and when they were really deeply connected in a local church where they were in community. So tell me about the best times, okay? The other reason that is important is because there's a body of research that shows that one of the ways to help stir this positive ambivalence, to push back against the hopeless narrative, is just a very respectfully, gently, in counseling psychology, this is called exceptionalism. Tell me about times in your relationship that are an exception to what you're experiencing right now. And just understand, for the leaning out spouse, they may stumble a little bit, and if the leaning out spouse goes, oh, we've never been happy. And I kind of like that because this is just me, I'm weird. I will say something like, I've done a lot of weddings. You guys have I don't think we've ever been in love. It's been bad from the beginning. You guys may be the first. I don't know. I've done a lot of weddings. I've never had a couple stand up in front and right before we're going to take the vows, they kind of whisper to me, hey, preach. We really hate each other. We think marriage isn't all that great. But, we've already paid for the wedding cake and the DJ. Let's just go ahead with it. We've never been friends. You're kind of teasing them a little bit, right? The stirring of that positive ambivalence, according to this body of research, when couples are in the divorce decision-making process, which is fluid, stirring that positive ambivalence that at one point we were happy because it begs the question, why? And now you can start talking about some of the things and some of the behaviors that have come in to their life that are contributors to the marital distress now that they think are not going to change. The other cool thing about this is they get done with this whole map, and for some of the really hard life events, they've lost a family member, they've had miscarriages, they've lost their home, there's been financial reversal, they've gone through spiritual or physical abuse. I can flip this over and say, you know what? By God's grace, you don't have to repeat. The first 10 years of your marriage does not have to be the imprint of the next 10 years. You get to choose. I can also look at this and with integrity, and Bill and I were talking about this, just a really I'm sure you do this, but to have this, their whole mess. One gal was looking at me and she started crying. She said, Russ, we're really a mess, aren't we? I said, yep, so am I. You should see Mel's and mine. But I said, God does his best work when we're a mess. And I'm so thankful that you guys shared this mess with me. And here's what I could say afterward. You know, it's just my opinion, but I don't see, guys, I do this a lot. I don't see anything on your timeline that would lead me to believe that you don't have hope. And now this is the opposite of the therapist-assisted suicide. I am blowing wind, at least into a conversation and a decision that they have to make. I'm gently pushing back against that narrative. But they have to make that decision, and this tool really helps. Okay, I'm going to stop for a second. Comments, questions before we go on to the next slide? Okay, so call for help. Couples in front of us, husband and wife, we walk them through. How did you get here? What have you done to work on the relationship? What have you done to address some of the problems you've had? What role do your children play in the decision-making about the future of your marriage? Tell me about the best times in your relationship, times that are different, times where you weren't so stressed, you weren't experiencing this same kind of thing. Then, you know, it seems like the paths in front of you, can I just suggest what might be choices in front of you? And, you know, we just kind of frame them as paths. Path one is you can stay the same and hope something changes. Path two is you can move towards separation or divorce intentionally or unintentionally. I know for some people, little coach up here, if the couple has not used the divorce word, I don't use the divorce word. Why? Because you can, in some sense, in some couples, give the impression that you think it's closer to divorce. The opposite is also true. Just because a couple doesn't use the divorce word, they may find out in this conversation, they may never have actually had an opportunity to hear firsthand how unhappy their spouse has been. Question?
What if they use a separate word?
To path two, at this point, we can talk about separation later. I want to just, it's important, I want to parentheses. I just lay out the paths for them. At this point, I don't want them to drop a flag in which one they're choosing. I just want to lay them out and let them feed back to me. Does this make sense in terms of your options in front of you? So they can stay the same. They can move towards separation or divorce. I know some people feel like that's suggesting it. I don't advocate for divorce. That's a decision. I know that there are biblical permissions. This is way too early to do that if you're ever going to get to that place. I know that there are times it's appropriate. At this point, I say it because it is on the table. In Minnesota, we're a no-fault, no-waiting period state. In the largest county in the Twin Cities metro, it's 90 days from filing to finality. So it doesn't make any sense for me to pretend like divorce isn't an option. So it's an option that's in front of them. Or path three, which should be, that's not path 2.0. It's path three. You could push the pause button on the drift or direction of your marriage right now. And you could take 6 months to work really hard with the best help available to see if there's hope before making a final decision. So this protocol does not lead a couple to make a commitment to stay married forever. We believe that's what the Bible teaches. That is our ultimate goal. But right now in this moment, they can't make that decision. That's like asking the kid who just got smashed up on the motorcycle, do you understand that for the rest of your life, you just need to be more careful on your thing?
We have
on your Sean.
We have a question from the stream.
Somebody wants to know, what if they use the word separate even though they haven't used the word divorce?
I'll say that, okay, then that's part of your path. That's part of your path too. It's part of what you're thinking. Right now, I'm not suggesting anything. I want them to get, do you understand? I will use separation or divorce. Path 3 is a commitment to take 6 months to work as hard as you can. And 6 months is generally more than enough time for God to show up, for individual spouses to demonstrate whether they're willing and able to begin to make some of the changes, for the marriage to become healthy, become the phrase that we use, the long view. What kind of marriage could we possibly have? It just has 2 characteristics. It glorifies God by using the wisdom of Scripture as a foundation, common to all of our Christ follower marriages, but it's a marriage that's good for both of you. It's a marriage that's good for both of you. So if the separation question comes up, I might explore that in the individual sessions. I won't. The reason that I will just receive it from them is I don't want to start an argument between the husband and wife over, well, if you won't agree to separation, we'll just divorce. Some of you have already, you've done this. You know, if the separation's entered into in an unhealthy way, it's one step toward divorce. I've also used separation a number of times in a very healthy way with guidelines and really scripted roles and responsibilities. And we use the medical illustration. It's a cast. Nobody likes the cast on. It's restrictive, but something's broken. And in some cases, separation gives a temporary support to something that if you take it off too soon, it's going to be re-injured. If you leave it on too long, you're going to atrophy the relationship. And I've worked with it. So I'm not holding that out as a model for you. I'm just saying I've worked with more than a handful of couples that, in fact, one of the biggest healing moments for one of the other spouses was when the one spouse agreed to a fair, limited time of separation where they both had a written plan for helping with the children. And what it did is it gave them some margin and some proximity so they weren't constantly scratching the wounds that they needed help to heal. Make sense? Thank you for that. Okay. Confidentiality we talked about. Okay, phone protocol. We want you to practice something. Turn in your manuals. We're going to help you, just give you a little bit of help on the first call for help. So this is page 8. There's 2 kinds of scenarios. If you want to rip that out of the back, it's in the back. Was it page 37? If it's not, 38? Okay.
No, 37 is the phone, sorry.
37 template? Okay. I just use this. Why? For a couple of reasons. One, if I'm on a phone call, you might be much more organized and be able to keep all the stuff in your head. As I'm walking through it, it just reminds me, what do I want to offer them? What's my goal in this conversation? Am I talking to the husband or wife? And especially for me, because when I'm doing this a lot, I don't know. Have you ever mixed up faces in couples and details where you're going, the template's so good. Okay, so what do you want to learn? Who are you talking with, husband or wife? What kind of information would you like to give me? You could ask for this. Some people say it's a little bit too soon. We just haven't. Hey, do you guys have a church home? Here's what I'm doing. They've called for help. I'm trying a little bit verbally just to slow down the conversation. Then when I get to the hard and soft problems, I'll say something like this, because I want to put a limit on this phone conversation. If this conversation's open-ended, we're inevitably going to drift to them unloading. You can hear it in the background. Beep, 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 beep. They're backing up their dump truck of their view. Okay? So I just want to hey, tell me what's going on. And you know what? Please, I've got about 15 minutes. I want to be respectful of your time. How much time do you have? Well, I got lots of time. I'm driving to work. I got a half an hour. I've got about 15 minutes. Just tell me what's going on. What am I listening for? I'm listening for hard and soft reasons, okay? Acute or chronic? This is me. I just ask a question that helps me understand, get a little closer to that. Acute means, is this something that just happened in the last year, or is chronic something that's been going on? So I ask him what I call the balloon question. Hey, Steve, hey, thank you for calling. I've skipped over all the part you do intuitively. You affirm them, you pray with them. Hey, Steve, I'm really glad you called. What would help give me a sense of what's going on is if your marriage were a balloon, does what you're experiencing now feel like a slow leak, or does it feel like a pin pop? What am I getting at? I'm getting at acute and chronic. I might also say, does it feel like you guys were going along, I'll switch up the metaphor, railroad car. Does it feel like you guys were going along okay, and something jumped the tracks and you've never been able to get back on? Yeah, a little bit like that. Okay. How motivated, Steve, without going into a lot more detail, how motivated do you think you would say you are at wanting to work in your relationship? And just receive it. How motivated do you think your spouse might be? And then just receive it. And then they'll say, well, they're not motivated at all. This next question is really important. What has your spouse said to you about their willingness to work on the relationship? Have you guys sought any help in the past? You just want to know that high level? Okay, that's helpful. Yeah, we came to you last year, and the marriage counseling didn't help very much. Oh, well, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate you coming back and talking to me. Are you currently seeking help? Are you guys in counseling right now? When you're back listening to some of the hard things, okay, the hard, soft reasons, if you hear things like maybe some breadcrumb trails of abuse or some hard reasons, abandonment, alcohol, you don't have to follow those up. You just want to note them. Why? You don't want to go into a conversation now. And you don't want to set up, so you're using this template to get a little bit of information, to connect with them, to reassure them. Bottom line is you want to say, hey, do you think Sally would come in so that we could sit down and talk together? No, I don't think she would come in. Well, what has she said about being well? Could I give you some words? Okay? Sure. Yeah, you could give me some words if you want. Well, I know you're really amped up about this, and I understand you think there's been an affair or something going on. Can I give you the most helpful words, Steve, I can think? And I know that you're upset. I know that you feel betrayed. I know that you feel angry. But the Scripture has so much to say about the humbling of our heart. And rather than an invitation for your wife to come join us because we've got to do something and you're going to sit down, go in exactly the opposite direction in humility and say, we haven't been getting along and I'm afraid. A lot of anger really has the basis of fear behind it, right? You're fighting because you don't know what to do. And so for that softness, honey, I'm afraid of where we're going, and I don't know. I'm confused. I don't know what the future of our relationship holds, and it scares me. And I've talked to someone who's been trained to help us answer one question. Before we make an irrevocable decision, are we absolutely sure divorce is our best and our only option? And it would just really mean a lot if you would come with me and both of us can listen. I don't know if this is for us or not, but you're inviting them to come one time. Would you be willing to just come once and hear, and then you and I can talk about whether we think this would be helpful for us? See, it leaves it so open-ended. It's an invitation. What I want this person who wants to save the marriage, who called you to do, I want them to send the invitation. I want them to keep the door open. I want them to set the table. And now they have to trust God, because they may make an ask and it may get rebuffed. They keep praying. And now let the Spirit of God. But you're far more likely to invite a leaning out spouse to come in and tell their side of the story if they know a couple things. One, you're doing it in humility, but secondly, you're affirming, Russ didn't let me spill everything about our story. In fact, he actually stopped me and said, just out of respect for you, out of respect for us, but it would be a chance for us to get some clarity on how we got here. Would you be interested in that? Does this make sense? Okay, here's what I'm asking you to do. Around your tables, those of you who are working really hard to earn that CD, I just want you to make sure that everybody gets a chance. Just take one of you, so that, remember this is one-on-one. One of you be the person who's calling in for help. The other person, just follow the protocol best you can and create a conversation. You're not on a phone, okay? So you can do it face to face. When I meet with a couple the first time, I use the phone protocol. Why? I've done this tons of times. Why? I want to stay focused on where I need to go. I want to, in an orderly way, collect the information I need if this couple is going to, okay? Any questions about just doing that around your table? Just make sure everybody gets a chance to do it once. So if you got 4, everybody pair off. If you have an odd number, I want the person who's the odd number to observe and give some feedback to the person who's trying the phone protocol, okay?
Okay, so you gonna call me?
Sure.
All right, talk to me, since you've got the script.
Yeah, I can do that. Hi, is this Cindy?
It is.
Yeah, I just wanted to call because I've been made aware that you've been seeking some help maybe on your marriage, and so I just wanted to get a little bit of information. First of all, your phone and messages, and I'll go through all that. Are you guys plugged into a church somewhere?
We are.
Okay. Where might that be?
We go to fellowship
Okay.
here in town.
Okay. And do you have kids?
We do. We've got 4.
Well, okay.
4 married daughters.
Great. That's awesome. Well, tell me a little bit about what are some of the things you and Gary have been struggling with.
Well, I like to just do a lot of fun things, and he's just not fun anymore.
Okay. Anything else?
Was not the same man I married, because when we got married, I mean, we used to go boating and we used to go dancing and we would do all these things, and now he just wants to golf.
Okay. When would you say that these struggles began over time? What kind of time frame are we looking
Well, I
at?
think when we were dating, he was really fun and engaging, and then we got married, and it was kind of like it became this like fuddy-dud that doesn't want to do anything.
I forgot to ask at the beginning of our conversation, how many years you've been married?
20.
Okay. Is there any other indicators that just that you've been struggling with as far as your relationship? Things that you can tell, maybe something happened between you, maybe a significant event.
I don't think so. I mean, it feels like we just kind of drifted apart. Like we're not the same people that we were when we were young and had fun.
How's Gary feeling about? How would you say Gary's feeling about the desire to try to reconcile or try to make your marriage better?
I honestly don't think he thinks there's a thing wrong. I think he's a happy camper.
So you wouldn't say that he's really motivated to want to seek help?
I don't think so. You know, his parents had this marriage where they've like been married 55 years, but it's like they're just in the same house together. They're not really like married. And I think that's what he sees. Like he can be like his dad and it'll just last 55 years. And I'm not his mom. And I look at their marriage and think, that's what he wants. That's not what I want.
I bet that's hard. Been hard for you.
It is.
Yeah. Do you think that Gary would be willing to come in and sit down and to talk about some of these problems? Or
I don't know, you know, we tried counseling for a while. He really didn't like the guy very much, and so that wasn't very helpful. I'm kind of like ready to just be done.
Okay. Do you think that if he had a place that he felt that he could be safe and be heard, do you think that maybe you could encourage him to come in and just give him a chance where he'd have a chance to share what's on his heart?
I can ask him.
Okay.
I mean,
Okay.
he's just not real enthusiastic about anything.
Yeah. I'd like to go, yeah, he's a real deadbeat. glad that's him, not me. I think that's all.
So how do you end the phone conversation?
Well, I'd just like to request a meeting face to face with you guys, just to sit down and just to try to get started on that. And some of the verbiage that I would encourage you to talk to Gary about, or it's just that I'd like to invite him in just for him to know how the emotions you're feeling, and to also give him the opportunity to have a place to talk, to share how he's feeling, because it sounds like he's kind of clueless. Okay, I'll use your word there. Okay, so what we would do is we'd sit down and we would talk to him about engaging, understanding the problem, and talk a little bit about how to help you guys walk through that process, and just see if he's interested. Or does that sound like something we could do?
Yeah, I mean, it can't hurt anything. If you can light a
2
fire
minutes,
under,
folks.
that'd be
Now, a minute,
great with
30
me.
seconds.
All right. Well, why don't you talk to him about that? Let me close in prayer. So
Okay.
then I'm going to offer a brief prayer, and we're done.
Okay, table leaders, start to gather. We're going to go kind of quick through the next set of sessions, because here's what's going to happen. On page 12, I'm going to, just to give us a little bit of margin, I'm going to skip an introductory video that doesn't. I'll role play it for you right here, and it'll save us a little bit of time. Well, maybe not. Maybe not. This is on page 12. So let's assume couple comes in. Okay, that's our assumption right now. Couple sitting in front of you. I greet them. I keep in mind I've got one person that wants to be there and one person that doesn't. And so I have this written down. In fact, every time I meet with a couple for pastoral counseling or whatever, I've got these two things. One, I need to connect with them. Secondly, I just have a benign question. Hey, what's on your mind as we start? What were you thinking as you were driving over? Sometimes a person says nothing. Sometimes a person goes, I was thinking, here we go again. We've been to counseling. Oh, Steve, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. I said, when Mel and I went to counseling, it kind of felt like going to the principal's office. So any questions? Now, if you know the couple, you don't need this dialogue, but if you kind of know them, hey, you guys don't know anything about us. But I just want to really affirm the courage that it took for both of you to be here. And Sally, especially for you, because I know you didn't want to come. No, I didn't want to come. Sally, I just want to affirm you. It takes a lot of courage to come to a meeting you didn't want to have. And I'm really thankful that you're here. And notice for me, you might have a different thing. For me, I've got to slow down my language. When I get excited, when I get angry, more words, more volume, right? Okay? So for me, I have to physically, I'm just really glad you're here. And I'm looking at them. I'm acknowledging their presence. And why is it counterintuitive in this beginning thing for connection? This is what we call, at this point, I'm trying to get my emotional passport stamped. Passports are so that you can go into a country that you have no business being in, and you have gotten permission to do business or to be on a trip, right? And so in one way to stamp that, I want to defer. So the other person over here, I'm so glad we're here. That's all great. I want to try, if at all possible, as natural as I can, to connect first with the person that I can see or sense the skid marks from their car right to the chair where they're sitting. Why? Because they expect condemnation, right? They expect hesitancy. And I just want to, hey, thank you. I know it took a lot of courage to be here. So what was on your mind? Receive it from the other person. Would you mind if I just opened in a word of prayer? Now, for us as believers, this is life and breath to us, right? If the Lord doesn't show up, nobody gets changed, right? Here's what I want to just encourage you to think about. You have written prayers in the protocol in your manual. Look them over. I want you to think and either write it out or have a prayer in here so that you're not tempted. You're not tempted to pray in ways which are going to unintentionally alienate the person. So to call down the hellfires of Gehenna against the ravages of divorce in our culture, it's true, but that's not the time to pray it. Okay? So you acknowledge the time for me to do that kind of praying is on my knees before I meet with that couple. I need to do the spiritual warfare before that couple ever shows up. Because what they need from me, they need that sense of those two passages. They need Jesus to show up with skin on, to just slow everything down and right in the dirt. They need the father of the prodigal who for day after day after day looked in the same direction and said and prayed, maybe today. And when his son became visible as a small speck in the distance, he ran. That's who this couple needs to show up in the flesh. And so your prayer can be brief, it can affirm God's power, but don't spike the ball in the end zone. Does that make sense? Then you're going to transition, hey, I'd really like to know what would you hope to get out of our time together? You're asking about goals. Now, you have goals, right? This is not an unstructured conversation. But I want to honor them. I want to know. What would you like to take home, if possible, from our conversation? The leaning in spouse is going to have something. Leaning out spouse is going to say something, I don't know. You know what? That would make sense to me if, Doug, if you're coming to a meeting and you maybe didn't really want to be here, that would make sense that you're not really sure. I came because Deb said that I had to come. Okay. But Doug, now that you're here, what would you hope to take away from our conversation? Do you see what I'm doing? I want him to know that even though he couldn't verbalize it, or maybe it wasn't safe enough for him to verbalize it yet, I want him to know that I care about what he would like to take away. Does that make sense? Okay. So what we're going to do, the couple's here, you've greeted them. Now you're going to go into introducing. Here's what we're going to do. You're going to just look at it in your manual. I'm going to nuance it a little bit. You're going to see it on a video. I'm going to ask questions, move on to the next one. We're going to get all of those done, and then you're going to see the whole process role play. Make sense? Here, let me just back up for a minute. See where this says cheat sheet down at the bottom, pages 38 through 44? We took all of the protocol and we summarized it on 3 sheets, the dialogue, and then we summarized it down further to 1 page. So as you get more familiar, you might want to just use your manual. As you do it more, you might want to use the 3-page summary. As you get more familiar and the language becomes your own, you might want to use the 1-page. I never work with a couple unless it's an emergency and I don't have stuff with me. I never intentionally work with a couple without having the 1-page summary in front of me. Okay? So both are together. The mixed agenda couple, divorce is on the table or it's being thought about. It may not have been verbalized. The framework is a 2-hour high-impact session with a follow-up. Here's another, I forgot to add this. This is an important thing. When you're coaching up the person who reached out to you, you're coaching them up to ask their spouse to come in. It's really important that you teach them this. Teach them to ask their spouse to come to meet how many times? 1 time. Why? But you say the protocol is 2 sessions. Because they always make a decision to come 1 at a time. 1 session at a time. And it helps the leaning out spouse not feel like they're being invited to 10 weeks of a Bible study or 15 weeks of counseling. Why? Because this is triage. You're not going to leave them in the street bleeding out that long. Okay? 1 time seems, would you come with me 1 time to help both of us listen, both of us who we can take away? They're sitting in front of you. Desired outcomes, you want both of them to feel heard. They agree to slow down the breaking up process if it's underway. That's actually a farther down goal. They have hope for their marriage. And again, the tentative language is, you just have to understand this. The leaning in spouse is hope that we're going to stay married forever. It makes perfect sense. It's biblically what we want. The leaning out spouse is hope to see if we can see if there's hope. Write this down somewhere. You and I can work effectively with couples that have very different levels of hopefulness. It is not necessary for couples to be at the same. In fact, I'll do a game with them. It seems weird. I'll go, okay, sit in your hands. I know I'm not a really good therapist. Just sit in your hands. Okay, when I say 3, I want you to, and I've worked with them for a while, so I'm checking on the level of hopefulness. When I say 3, put up your hands on a scale of 1 to 10. How are we doing? So we might be 5, 6 sessions in, and sometimes they'll get 5, and sometimes they'll get 6. And what I'll do is I'll just have them talk to each other and go, it doesn't matter who had 5 or who had 2. I'll go average them together. 5 and 2 is 7, so let's talk about where you are. The numbers are irrelevant, right? You could come in feeling like a 2 in any setting, and if you get hope, you could leave feeling like a 9. It's just a tool. It's just a way to get them engaged. Not therapy, not an assessment of the relationship. It's a receiving of the current state of conflict in the relationship. It's not an assessment. Desired outcome is they experience a calm, non-reactive sharing of what went wrong, what they tried to do about it, what originally drew them close. They understand, and they understand there's a reconciliation path that they could choose if they wanted to. Okay? There's a thing about the seating, and for some of you, you'll see in the way we, a number of years ago, the way that we, Dr. Kenworthy videoed this, it's a little bit more like a counseling thing. And I know there's language in your manual that says you don't do it across the table. I would encourage you to do what's comfortable. I always do it across the table. You know, I got to have a place for my coffee, okay? I've done this in Starbucks several times with millennial-age couples. My generation, we would not be caught dead out in public talking about our marriage problems, okay? But some of the younger generation, oh, hell, I'll meet you at Starbucks. Okay, let's do it, okay? What you want to do is make sure that the people are comfortable. They're seated comfortably. And you understand this. It's okay if you've got a round table and they're not sitting together, right? Don't let your heart drop because they're not. There's perfect reasons why they're not sitting together. Sample prayers, you can make them your own. Just no spiking the ball in the end zone. You want to listen to them without comment unless something's not clear. Okay, unless something's not clear. Why? Because when I add more comment, and this is some physically, here's what I have to do. I know you don't have this kind of struggle. Physically, I've got to put my finger in front of my mouth. I know it looks very, what's the word? Looks very astute. I do this because it reminds me to keep my mouth shut. Why? Because any comment on it, now I fall so easily into telling my story. Oh, this happened to Mel and me. Guess what? This is not about my story. This is about their story. Okay, let's watch the video. George has greeted them. They're into the protocol.
While we're together then, there's another question that I would like to ask you. And the question is, what is it that has brought each of you to the point where divorce is on the table today? What's happened over the last several months or years that's gotten you to this point?
For me, it's communication. That's definitely the big thing. The disconnect that we've had for, 6 years. The lack of intimacy, any intimacy in a relationship. And for me, the big thing is the verbal abuse that I feel is going on. Not only on his part, but also on mine. I think those are probably the big things.
So Tom, what about you?
Well, I think she nailed it great. I think the communication part. I think a lot has to do with I haven't had a beer in almost a week. I think maybe I have drank a little too much, and that kind of pushed me away from Barb and the boys. I just shut my emotions off from her, and so I kind of blame it on that, you know. Some of it, probably a lot of it. And that drove me not to hang out with her more. We just, well, I think what Barb said, the disconnect. And Barb and I would never do anything together. We wouldn't even go out and have a hamburger or hang out together. So that just kind of drove us apart. And I can blame myself a lot for that. And I could have asked her to do something, but I think a lot of it was just, well, it was a lot to do with Barb is I wasn't emotionally there for her. Barb's a very emotional woman, and when I didn't give her that emotional, it shut her off, and it really drove her away.
Let me tell you again just about the sound and video quality. That is our bad. This is actually a verbatim script. This isn't, these are actually Dr. Boyd, Amanda is my boss, and he is a Christian actor who we took, with their permission, just the absolute transcripted words. So some of the words you're thinking, well, you can't make this stuff up. We didn't. What did you see and what did you hear just in listening and watching the couples talk? Anything, yeah.
He referred to her as she, which is not very...
He referred to her as she. Yep, in the third person. Is that the third person? Yep. What else? That's a great observation. Their emotional and physical difference, one seemed pretty to... Sure. I think you're pointing out, you can help me, that there was an emotional and physical difference between the two of them. One was kind of scattered, going around a little bit more nervous, and the other was a little bit more resolute, a little bit more focused, a little bit more, yeah, it's a great observation. Haven't you worked with couples where the one thing in the back of your mind, you're going, wow, how did you guys, you don't say it to them, but how did you guys get married? You'll find couples that have a very significant difference in their intellect, or what sometimes happens as couples get older, what? One person kind of stays focused on their thing. The other person starts working on personal growth and going to counseling. And now that they find years later, they feel like two different people that don't match up very much. And you noticed one of the things he did, and part of it is they're nervous. You got to cut folks a lot of slack, but they're very different. So when he's scrambling up here trying to think of what to say, yeah, like she said. Yes. Mike's coming. We'll take you, and there was one more in the back, I think.
I felt like he was feeling a lot of shame for his own behavior, like his drinking, but also he was taking on a lot of the guilt for the problems in the marriage.
Interesting. Good observation. What else? Beck? What else did you see? What else did you hear? What else just kind of struck you? Yeah.
I wondered if this is an actress.
Oh, Matt, Cheryl, the mic's coming. You get to drop the mic when you're done.
I wondered if she was an actress because her face says contempt. And so I didn't know if she had, if this was an actress, had she studied the actual person's face? But that face says, I have no respect for you.
Yeah. That's a good observation. I don't know an answer to that. Amanda has a PhD in industrial psychology and 2 masters in clinical. So I said, you're doing this like really well. It's kind of scary to your point. But the two of them spent time with the other couple's permission, which, by the way, that couple has been reunited. They're doing really, really well. So all of this trauma and stuff you see over about the last 4 or 5 years, that God has worked miraculously in their life through Dr. Kenworthy's ministry. Okay, yeah, one more, and then we'll keep going.
Yeah, I got the sense that he is feeling exposed. That he's been found out, and wow, what do you do with that?
Feeling exposed, yeah. That's a great word picture, and speaks to, when we kind of put some of these together, speaks to the importance of, if the wife, for really understandable reasons, is not able to do that, to either hold that exposure without condemnation, there needs to be one other person in the room that can, and that's you. And that's you. Okay. Now we're going to move to the repair. What did they do to try to solve their issues? And you know what? You're going to notice sometimes the responses are circuitous and they kind of go all over the place. I really resonate with that. But sometimes they're really focused. You have personality differences. You also have to realize people don't talk the most clearly when they're nervous and when they're stressed. But you and I can help them by creating as safe a place possible. And then you may see things come out that they may not be worded properly, if I can put it that way, but they are revealing things that are very important. So watch body language and watch, listen to words. So this is the repair narrative. You've seen the wording. You want to remember to just keep saying to the couple, it's not just about your marriage, it's about the whole of your relationship, okay? And in the repair narrative, now you're going to have introduced toward the end that question when the couple says, hey, what have you done to do this? Have you watched reruns of Dr. Phil? Have you gone to church? Have you gone to Bill? What have you done? And then they talk about it, and what you're interested in is, you're not judging how well their therapy went, because you and I can't know that. What you want them to do is to say, what was that experience like for you to be in counseling? Okay? You just want them to share that. And then let's transition. What role do your children play in your decision making about the future of your relationship?
Now I'd like to ask you what you have tried in the past to solve your problems. Have you done any professional counseling, for example, or have you gotten any help in any other way? So again, whoever would like to start.
We've never professionally done anything. I think we try to communicate, and one of us ends up blowing up. We'll then talk about doing things better for, I don't know, about a week later, it just goes back to the same.
We can have great conversations, and then we go back to our old ways. I go this direction, Barb goes that direction.
We're very different people. Yeah. Very different.
Yeah, Barb's sociable, and I'm not. You know, I talk to people. I'm not a hermit or anything like that. Barb likes to run and be sociable, you know, make friends. I didn't care really if she did that at all. What happened was, I think a lot of times is that, I don't know if I felt jealous or shut out, you know. I think a lot of times she would ask me if I want to go, but it seems it was just out of courtesy, not that she really wanted me to go.
Well, I know that you have children too. What role do your children have in your decision making about your marriage?
For me, they're first and foremost, and probably the reason I've waited as long as I have. I feel very strongly that we're better off separate, for them especially, and because they see, you know, we're not like screamers and yellers, but we say some very harsh things to each other in front of the kids. And for me, I don't want to regret. I don't want them to repeat history. And I don't want to hear me say those things to him and him say those things to me. I didn't think my kids actually knew as much as they did until we talked to them about a month ago maybe. And I realize now that they actually know everything. that was, I felt like, why didn't I do it sooner? Then they just have it ingrained in their heads, and they're at such impressionable ages. So that was a big consideration for me. I just didn't want my kids to continue to see the sadness, to see the disrespect, and see the verbal abuse. I am a big believer that you shouldn't stay together, keep your marriage together just for the kids. I don't think it's healthy. I frankly don't think it's good for anyone. And the kids are definitely sad and probably a little mad. And they definitely blame me, not Tom, which, is okay.
So, Tom, same question.
See, I have a different view than Barb as far as the verbal and all that. Verbal abuse, I didn't see too much verbal going on because we never talked. Maybe there was. Maybe I'm blind to it or whatever. And then she said, well, we never screamed at each other in front of the kids. I do take blame, and I feel bad about the kids as they're concerned, showing disrespect to their mom in front of them, And that makes me sad for them and all that. The kids mean everything to me. I just can't see them growing up without having their dad always in their life or their mom always in their life.
What did you see and what did you hear? Yeah. Sorry.
I saw Mike coming. I saw where she was saying something. They both said it, but she said the kids mean everything to her. She used the word foremost, and then she got talking about all this conflict, and she saw the answer to avoiding all this conflict is just run away from it or just get away from it.
Great observation. Divorce is almost always an attempt to solve a problem that people believe can't be solved in any other way. One or two more. What did you see? What did you hear? Great observation.
She was quick to say, well, the kids blame me, and I guess that's okay. But she wasn't okay with it. She felt like the blame should have been on him. It was pretty obvious by her previous statements to that point.
Yeah, good observation. She's already, when we come back from the thing, I'm going to talk real briefly about the walk-away wife syndrome. She's already trying to make peace and to have a cognitive congruency up here that gives her permission to leave the relationship. And she's doing it because she feels it's the only choice she has. So great observations. Okay, now Dr. Kenworthy's going to shift the conversation, is going to talk about, encourage the couple to talk about the best or the better times in the relationship. And remember that this is one of those crucial points where you want them to think outside of the years they've been married. And for some of us, when we're working with couples that have had multiple marriages, this is going to take a little bit for them to process. And here's what you want, if you don't hear it, here's what you want to focus on. What were times in their relationship when they felt differently than they do now? And secondly, what were they doing differently? Okay? You've got in the manual, and again, I just reiterate, the manual almost is like an encyclopedia of questions and other things. You don't have to absorb everything in the manual in order to do this effectively. It's a good resource to go back to when you have questions.
I have another question for you. When was a very best time in your relationship, a time when you really connected and you felt joy? So who would like to go first this time?
Well, I think we used to have fun together. I can't really pinpoint when or why it stopped, but I do think we did. I don't think we've ever had the marriage people think that they're going to have, but who does? But I don't think we've ever had a real healthy marriage.
So tell me what was going on during those good times. What exactly were you doing?
A lot of it was we talked. I think we could be a lot more open with one another without judging each other. And then we got to the point where we just judged everything that the other person did. For me, during the good times, I felt like I could be myself. I felt like I could be who I was. And then that all went away. I felt like my whole self was just somebody that I didn't know anymore.
So Tom, when you remember the good times, what were you doing?
Well, like she said, we were hanging out together, communicating together, laughing together, being intimate together, being affectionate toward one another. I love you, having fun. I think Barb will attest to this too. My dad passed away 10 years ago. My mom passed away 6 years ago. And that was really hard on me. Really hard. I probably did change. I probably did go into more of a shell. Where again, I didn't let my emotions out and I didn't seek Barb for advice or comfort. I just kept it all to myself. Probably started doing my own thing more.
I think you didn't do anything. Didn't go anywhere, didn't do anything.
Yeah, it was a pretty tough time.
Deb, I'm coming.
Deb's observation was, it seems like the gal always goes first.
And he always agrees with her. Like Barb said, that's almost the first thing out of his mouth every time.
Sure.
So it's not, like, it makes me wonder, is he really asking himself how he feels or what he feels? Or he's just like, well, she said it, so I'm agreeing with that.
So it's a great question. You've been in this position before, so let me ask you. How would you work through a situation where one of them is more verbal and one seems to be taking the lead and one seems to agree? What kinds of things come to you that you would do?
You engage the man first. You would ask him, Tom.
Great. Did everybody hear that? Yep.
I think there was a clue in there. In one of the previous videos, he talked about 6 years ago is when he really started drinking. And now coming back, his dad died 10 years ago, and then his mom 6 years ago. And it's kind of like that. There's a clue in there of kind of the underlying what's been going on for him.
Great. And see, that's characteristic. A number of you will do this. That's characteristic of someone who's listened to two parts of a conversation and you put it together. Yeah. There's a lot of pain. There's a lot of pain going on in both. One has kind of got it bottled down and torqued down, okay? If this is going to happen, it's going to happen. The kids are going to hate me. It's okay. And the other one, it's just at the top and ready to explode. But great observation that we need to be looking for links.
Then also at the very end, she rebutted what he said. And he said, I may be doing my own thing. And she said, you didn't go do anything. And
yeah,
the therapist didn't come back into that, dive into that point there.
It's a great observation. And the therapist who actually, at that point, is not a therapist, right? I mean, Dr. Kenworthy does counseling. At that point, he's a reconciliation coach in discernment counseling. His responsibility is actually to let that go and only drill down if he's unclear about what has been said. Okay? Now, for some of us, I'll just offer this, it's helpful for me. This stuff wells up inside of me, and I got all kinds of things because I do a lot of pastoral counseling. So there are times when I have to just remind myself that there are really profound empathetic words that help me slow down and help me stay present with them. Words that, and you've never heard this before, but words like, oh, man, I feel that. I haven't agreed with their perspective. I haven't Does this make sense? And some of you know this. I would encourage you, you can find some of this stuff online, on Google, but having even a list of words you start to put in up here, so when you and I are kind of tempted to dig deeper and to start uncovering stuff and to start offering solutions, I got to do one of two things. I got to do this, okay, so here's the guy who's really struggling to get his story out. As soon as I start adding to that story, he'll do exactly what he does with his wife, which is what? Oh, you're talking now. I don't have to talk. Make sense? Yep.
It seems they're so different. When you asked them what fun things did you do, they struggled with trying to find something they had fun doing together.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe they're just so, we tell the conferences all the time, do something together when you have the kids, because when the kids leave, you're not going to have anything. But these guys were really struggling to find something fun they did together.
Yeah. And very quick, this isn't in your notes, but very quickly, just to help another framework for understanding, it's called the walk-away wife syndrome. And you can Google it. I started reading about it in a book called Divorce Busters, where when you think of the marriage in phases, okay, in the first phase, beginning of the first phase, wife's the relational monitor and just kind of knows, hey, you got to put gas in the tank, and the husband's just happy he doesn't have to date, okay? So phase one, the wife's narrative up here is, this is wonderful, like in the first couple of months. In fact, there's researchers, there's endorphins, there's a whole neurobiological thing going on that's supporting the euphoria of the 6 months, 8 months. But then, middle of stage one, the wife begins to go, we got to put gas in the tank here. And the husband's still going, yeah. I like being married. Stage two, the wife's narrative starts to change. Over here it was, I'm afraid we're coasting. And in stage two, the wife's narrative changes to, I don't like living this way. And so oftentimes what happens is a ramp up of, we call this pursuer distancer. The woodpecker starts going, we got to do something. Or you can go the other way, she just collapses and oftentimes would say, I just lost myself in this. But there's more tension, there's more pressure. The husband keeps feeling like, it's never enough. I'm working as hard as I can. And so second phase, husband keeps his head down. I guess I need to make more money. It's never enough, it's not working. The wife is trying to get his attention. And in phase three, the wife's narrative up here changes. And the wife now begins to think in her mind and in her heart, generally speaking, moving from I don't like living this way to I will not live this way. And I will leave when? And now there's a blank to be filled in. I'll leave when I get my promotion. I'll leave when the kids grow up. I'll leave when I finish my education. And now, guess what happens? Generally, in the tension, what would you imagine would happen? Why do you think when the husband gets divorce papers served in phase three, oftentimes he's shocked? He thought they were doing better, right? Because in stage three, the conflict went down because the wife now has dropped the rope. She has an exit plan. She begins to fantasize about a life with, and it doesn't have to be sexual or sordid. She's just beginning to get some mental and emotional breathing room that at some point this can get better. And husbands are often baffled being served divorce papers in stage three. Why didn't you serve me divorce papers when you were yelling at me all the time? I don't know if that resonates with any of the couples that you've worked with, but sometimes it helps to explain why someone like Amanda can be very settled in this conversation. It doesn't mean that it's over. Why? Because you have prayer, you have a process, you have a plan, and so you don't have to panic. You have peace because God is still in this. And it's God's job to change hearts. We're going to transition to the three paths that he's going to lay out. In fact, I'm going to skip the video on that. It's pretty straightforward. Here's what you need to know about the three paths, okay? And then we're going to go to our role play so that we have enough time for that. When I'm laying out the three paths, hey, I just like to suggest what occurs to me. That's a good transition. You might transition, differently. Hey, we've done a lot of talking. Thank you. I affirm. Wow, you guys, oftentimes I'll do this. I like to talk about holding up the mirror. So here's a conflicted couple, one that didn't want to be here, but they've spent an hour with me. They haven't scratched each other's eyes out. They've been fairly respectful. They have worked really, really hard at sharing some of the hardest things in their life with someone that they don't know very well. And I make them both a hero. Can I just, so for me, a good transition to the three paths, you can choose to do something else, would be something like this. Hey, can I just stop for a minute? I just want to hold up the mirror and tell you guys how impressed I am. You've been respectful, you've been calm, and this has been such hard work, and you've stayed here with it. I just want to tell you that it just seems to me that there is some resilience in you that says, I don't want to let go of this marriage. Otherwise, you could have walked out at any point. I just want you to know that. And so now let me just lay out in front of you what the options might be for you. And you tell me here's the phrase, you tell me if they make sense to you. So I'm asking them if all of the options make sense. I'm not asking them to weigh in on which one they're choosing. They might do that, but I don't want to invite that. It's early at this point. You can stay the same and hope something changes. And just parenthetically, there's a body of research out there that says fairly large group of couples that described themselves as extremely unhappy did nothing. Didn't go to therapy, didn't go to church, didn't get Mike Fenley's book on the final word of the Spirit-filled wife. None of that, didn't do any of that. They just hung in there and 5 years later reported themselves being, I don't go into all that, just you guys can stay the same, hope something changes. You could move towards separation or divorce, and if it's been mentioned, I'll acknowledge that. Kristen, this is something that you did mention, and I just want to acknowledge it. You guys could move towards separation or divorce, and you mentioned it's an option that's in front of you, and I leave it there. Or you have a third option, and let me just describe it. It's called the reconciliation path. It would mean that the two of you would think about pushing the pause on the direction and drift of your marriage right now and make a commitment to get the best help available and work really hard for 6 months to see if there's hope before you give up. And then, do these seem like the options in front of you? Yeah. Or no, I didn't understand that one. It's not a commitment to stay married forever. You might get some dialogue like this. You might get, well, of course, we're not going to stay. No, path one is out totally. And the other one goes, no, we can't stay like that. And you're thinking, oh, this conversation is accelerating. I'm getting excited. Why? Hey, let me just stop you guys. Do you guys realize what just happened? You agree on something. What do they agree on? The relationship has to change. The leaning out spouse came into this conversation believing that the relationship couldn't exist. Do you see what's potentially changed? They've gone from, I can't stay in this, to, I can't stay in this relationship as it has been. Which has made perfect sense because one, it doesn't glorify God, and two, it's not good for either of them. Does that kind of make sense? So now, I'm going to stop at this point. I'm going to draw just a little bit up here, just so you have actually I'd do it under, Bill's stuff is so sacred, you can't really erase it. So there's the call for help. Mike asked me, what's your handwriting like before we end up doing this? I said, it stinks. It has all my life, but I'll just write big letters, okay? Not full sentences, just big letters. So there's a call for help, okay? Hopefully that leads to the couple meeting with you. This is where we stop the process right now. You've gone through the conflict narrative, the repair narrative. You've asked about their children. You've asked about the best times. That would be a B. I was going to say good times, and I wouldn't have to change it. And you've given them the 3 paths, the 3 options. Okay? In the full protocol, what we would now do then is to take the leaning out spouse and talk with them, and the leaning in spouse, L-I and L-O, and we would talk to them separately, and then we would bring them back, and through speaker listener, we would teach them to talk to each other about where they are in this process. All of this is scripted, by the way. So if the top half made sense to you, you could take the rest of the manual and go, yep, this makes sense to me. The reason we talk to them separately is because they have separate concerns. I want the leaning out spouse to stop pulling out of the relationship. I want them to be able to settle down and say, you still have a choice. If you choose for 6 months, you can see if you guys can get better. I want the leaning in spouse to stop pushing. I want the leaning in spouse to stop doing behaviors that are demeaning to him or to her. Begging, cajoling, threatening, accepting all of the blame. I want them to start focusing on actually on 2 things. If they have children, here's my mantra. You cannot control this. But there are 2 things in your life, and I oftentimes work with husbands. I call this hopeful spouse counseling. There are 2 things in your life that you can't control. Number 1, you can still pursue being a godly man. For some guys, being a godly man and having a broken marriage are incongruent. I want them to know that God still cares about them and they can still pursue the best they can, walking with God, being a godly man, and being a great parent. They still have control over some things. I want them to stop pushing and demeaning and give God some space for heart change and for grace and for all those other things. Does that make sense? And for the leaning in spouse, there's a portion of things, put a question mark, there's some stuff they need to be working on in their life anyway, whether the marriage stays together or not. God wants them. That's the godly husband part. Make sense? Comments, questions? Actually, comments and questions on this bottom piece, send them to me by email. I will be happy to dialogue as best I can with any of you. What I'd like to do right now is to invite our team up to, while they're coming up, are there any, coming up and getting set, are there any comments or questions I can kind of deal with? Yeah. This is a good question, I know.
What happens if one of the couple says, I want to go down path 2?
I will take that and go, why? Because that's where they're at. And I will address them going down path 2, okay, while I'm talking to them individually, okay? Why? Individually for about 15, 20 minutes, and it's actually those kinds of conversations are scripted in here. The person who goes, I want path 2 because my spouse will never change. Well, I'm going to be talking to your spouse in a minute about their alcoholism. I want to make sure they're taking it seriously. I want to just encourage you that as you're pushing, you feel this thing, I've got to get out of the marriage, I've got to get out, I want path 2. I don't ramp up and go, as a Christian, you call yourself a Christian, that option sucks. For God's glory and for you. It's the light at the end of the tunnel is an oncoming train. I'm really surprised you don't see that. I go in exactly the opposite direction. This is your marriage. Remember 2 and 4? Responsible 2 people, not for them. This is your marriage. And my fear for you is that you may be leaving God's hope on the table. My fear for you, and I'll bring in some of the information we've talked about, that, you know, as you pointed out all these places where you had been happy before, my fear for you is that you may add, always tentative language, you may be right on the brink of adding the pain of regret to the pain of divorce. Because it's painful to stay the same, amen? It's painful to go through divorce and separation. It's painful to work on your marriage. But out of all three of those, and I'm amped up a little bit, I do it very softly with a guy, because out of all of those options that you said, which do you think maybe has the best possibility of a positive outcome for you, for God's glory, for your children? And I would just want you to think about that. I would just want you to hold that. This is your marriage. See, I'm not grabbing the decision back away from him. Why? He has to own that. And the other thing is, I don't want to get between the spirit and the work. I don't want to get between the work and the hammer. If God's work, I just want to be a gentle voice of a Nathan and go, you know, I may tell you a story, I may empathize with you, but does that resonate at all? Let's have the role play. Do you guys, they have practiced, and they may, just little coach up, not for them. These couples are just wonderful. They spent time working on this. You may hear things that are actually better than are what in your manual. That's why we asked them to do this, because you guys are in this ministry, okay? So watch and observe. I'd like you to maybe take any notice of where did they kind of depart from the protocol, and where did they follow it, and what was it like, okay? Great, thank you.
Hey, Paul and Dawn, thanks for being willing to come in and talk to us today. And it's our goal, this is a safe place that we can kind of unpack what's going on. So if you're okay with it, I was wondering if I could pray for us before we move into that. Okay. And I forgot the prayer. Okay. Father, I just want to take a minute to ask you to join us here in this meeting today. I thank you for the opportunity that we have to meet with Paul and Dawn. Father, we know that you provide hope for us, and I just pray, Father, that you would do that today. Help us to be good listeners and encourage them along the way. Lord, join us in this meeting. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen.
So we want this to be a safe place for you to unpack whatever's going on. We want to just walk alongside you in this journey. So whatever you tell us is confidential. But we need to kind of know what's going on. So would you be willing to just take a few minutes for each of you to share from your point of view what's going on? Anybody want to go first?
Well, I think there's not a lot of hope for Paul and I.
Yeah, I think there is.
Well, Paul,
I think
no, we came here because we're having trouble communicating. I start, he shuts down. All that comes out is anger.
Mm-hmm.
There's just no way we can even communicate anymore.
I don't think it's that bad. I think she overreacts to a lot of things. I kind of want to know how we got to this point. That's what I want to get out of today.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. Where do you think it started? When did things start to? Apparently there was a time when it was good, and then it shifted. Tell us a little bit about that.
I don't know, for me, I don't know if there was I think this is where Dawn and I disagree. I don't think there was a starting point. I think it was to me, it's just been a gradual, the last several years, just a gradual kind of lack of communication, lack of intimacy. That's my perspective.
Well, I can tell you probably exactly when the big problems began was about 2 years ago when our oldest son started to experience some mental problems. Now he's been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. But throughout that, Paul's perfect world crumbled.
It wasn't perfect.
And he could not recover. And he wants everything to be like it was before, but it's not. And so there's just this big barrier now. I'm trying to help us move forward, and he just doesn't want to move.
What kind of things have you tried? Maybe I should ask first, have you tried anything, any other options, counseling, other options to kind of bring healing, bring you back together?
Well, I've bought lots of books on resources, and I've put them by his bedside. And I've suggested several times to go to marriage retreat, but work is very busy. It's just not a good time. So, no, we have not.
Paul, how about you?
Gary, she doesn't know. I've looked at them. I've gone through some of them. I am not big on, haven't been to a counselor. I have a couple of guys in my life that I've bounced some ideas, talked about some challenges in our relationship. So nothing formal, nothing professional.
You guys have a place that you call a church home?
Yes. We don't go together very often because work has just got him so busy. But I go, and I have a Bible study group, and we pray together I've shared quite a bit about what's going on. So I have some ladies that are walking with me through this because really I've felt very alone.
How many years, you mentioned earlier to me how many years you were married, but I don't remember what that was.
24.
24?
Yeah.
So as you think back to those 24 years of marriage, what were some of the best times, some of the times when you enjoyed your relationship? Were there experiences like that after you got married that you can remember that pop into your mind?
I think about me before kids. When we were deep in community at our local church, serving together, doing things together with the same kind of mission and vision. To me, those were super, super happy times. We were communicating better, more intimate. I mean, yeah.
How long ago was that?
That was a happy time. About 7 years ago.
Don, what's your perspective on that?
Well, yeah, I would agree. It was a period of time when we could really talk. I wasn't walking on eggshells like I feel like I am now, and could just be myself. But I would say it's longer than 7 years. But yeah, the one unifying factor I think that we have is our 9-year-old daughter. She has brought us together. He's willing to come to her events, and so that's the one thing that we can do together.
So there are some sparks of joy. Some times that you feel connected, even now?
With our daughter, for example.
Do you remember any times when it was more than your daughter, though, where there were connection times with you as a couple? Do you have any of those best times?
Well, I think like you mentioned, Paul, that when we were together, we didn't have the heavy weight of mental illness and trying to live a certain way. We had small children, and life was just easier.
Less stressful.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Was there anything you were doing differently back then than maybe?
I think our communication, Gary, was much better. We had things that would pop up, whack-a-moles in our marriage. We would deal with them head on and right then and there. We don't do that anymore.
Mm-hmm. So if I'm hearing what you said correctly, that kind of came to a head when your oldest son was diagnosed with bipolar. Before that, you felt like you were on the same team, raising kids and so forth, but now that's sort of put a divider between the two of you.
I guess so, yeah.
So we're understanding kind of where you
I
feel
guess
like.
Don's right, yeah.
where
That's
it
true.
comes from. So I guess at this point, your children are an important part of your life, it would appear.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, we have 4 children. We have our oldest, like we've already talked about him. Right now, he's doing okay, he's taking his medicine. We have 2 girls, both in school, and then we have our 9-year-old that's still at home.
And our kids play a very important role in all this. We want them to be happy. I don't want out of the marriage. It's been, rough, but they need their dad. I want to be around. I have some things to work on. I've got anger issues. I'm drinking much less than I used to. So.
Dawn, how do you feel about that with the kids and your role as a couple?
Yeah, I don't see a lot of hope because I hear Paul saying this, but I just don't see him living that out with us. Physically, he's there, but emotionally, he's not there. So I don't know.
Is there anything that has kind of brought this to a head? You said that this has been going on for several years, but is there anything that's kind of brought this to a head where you're starting to really, I sense your frustration? That's real, and I'm just wondering, is there anything in particular that kind of just,
Just tired. I'm exhausted trying to carry the weight of everyone and everything and work it all around his needs and stay out of his way. I just can't do it anymore.
How about you, Paul?
I don't feel that way. I want to keep in this marriage. I want to figure it out. Yeah, I've got things to work on. I think she does too. And maybe she's right. Maybe it is because of our oldest son. He was, mid school aspirations, our shining star, a valedictorian, that all came crashing down. I guess she's right, but I'm in. I want to figure out what's not working.
I appreciate you being so vulnerable and honest with us. I mean, you don't even know us, and you were willing to just share. Those are hard things to share with each other and with people that you barely know. So I really want you to know that we don't take that lightly. We really feel honored that you would trust us with your pain. I think we've got some options as far as how to move forward.
we kind of want to present with basically a couple of paths to move forward. One was just to obviously not do anything. You just kind of stick it out the way it is and grind along. I don't know if when you say it's done, I don't know what that means to you. You feel like you've had it, so I don't know if separation is an option there or what you're thinking, but that is an option. The third path that I would like to present would be one of seeking reconciliation. And what our proposal is there is for you guys just to kind of hit the pause button where you're at. You're kind of moving apart. It appears to me you are, where you take the time to hit this pause button and really seek some help for the next 6 months, to really make a 6-month commitment to sticking it out and really working hard. And that means it's going to take something from both of you. But you wouldn't be talking about these other options then. So basically,
Just for 6 months, at
just for
least.
6 months.
Yeah.
Yeah, this isn't a decision one way or the other as far as what happens after that, but it would be just either leave it like it is, continue to move apart, or to seek a reconciliation path. Does that make sense to you? What are your thinking?
Yeah.
And we'd be willing to walk alongside you in that any way that we can. Now, keep in mind, we're not professionals, we're mentors. We've been married for 40 years, so we've got a little practice at working on conflict. And we'll help in any way that we can. But it may come to the point, we look at ourselves kind of like over-the-counter. We're not prescription drugs, we're kind of like the Tylenol. And if we need over-the-counter, or more than over-the-counter, we're gonna have to go to the professional. And we'd want you at some point maybe to consider counseling, if that's the option that you choose. But we just want to be open with you about where each of these paths could lead and see how you feel about that. But we don't want you to make a decision today. We'd want you to go home, think about it, pray about it, and decide. But again, we're not asking for the long term, we're just asking for 6 months.
6 month commitment.
Yeah.
Okay.
I understand.
All right.
great. Our thanks. Okay, I'm going to have Bill come up and kind of gather the feedback, but before I do, stay right here. I want to just kind of really quickly walk through what would happen after this. Okay, so let's say that this took an hour. Well, the next follow-up protocol is actually in your manual, but let me just go over it. They'd agree to meet again, and what they would do is they would briefly just say, you know what, tell us again, what are the main reasons why you feel you're in so much distress? Tell me again, what role do your children play? They would just, very brief, they'd follow those themes, okay? And then if I sensed that, and I could be wrong, if I sensed that Dawn was the person who was leaning out, I would start with Dawn in a separate conversation. Why? Not only to defer to her, not only, she's the person that is framing up the exit strategy, and I don't want her sitting out for 15 minutes wondering what I'm talking to her husband about, who's been the cheerleader to stay in the marriage. Does that make sense? What I would talk to her about is, and this is all scripted, I'm doing the Cliff Notes version. I would want to, again, empathize with how hard this has been for her. I would want to align myself that it makes sense that she feels hopeless. I don't have to say, I'm not saying it's hopeless, but boy, when I heard you talk about, I think it's over, something hit me. Because Mel and I knew what that was like. That was a garage door moment for my wife, and so that really resonates. I would also ask Dawn if she had maybe read Dr. Kenworthy's book, or I would give it to her as a resource. Why? Because George has those 3 key questions. Okay, do you believe God exists? Are you willing to apply the principles of Scripture? Will you pray for your heart? I changed those to positive theological affirmations. 1, of course you and I believe God exists. The sub thing for believers is, does he care enough to show up in my marriage? Of course I know he exists. So the theological affirmation is, Dawn, I want you to know God is for you. I want you to know God is for you. And that little question about, would you be willing to apply the principles of Scripture? God will show you. When you and your husband don't really know which way to go, he already knows. I just want to remind you that and encourage you. He will show you. And about praying for a change in your heart, God will change you. Guess what? It is not my job now to change my heart. It's my job to align myself to the presence and an obedience of the Holy Spirit. What did God say of his people Israel? I will remove their heart of stone and I will give them a heart of flesh. And so my last takeaway for Dawn is, Dawn, you know what? We're going to be getting back with your husband in just a minute. And I know this is a really, really hard place, but what I'd like to give you is an opportunity. You're going to have his full attention. I want to give you an opportunity just to speak into his heart and into his life about where you're at on those 3 paths and anything you've taken away from our conversation. Does this make sense? And then Paul. That wouldn't be really good. That's why you write it down for Paul. Paul wants to save the marriage, right? So what I would do is I would affirm with him, this is hard. He's scared, right? He has no control over Dawn's decision making. I would affirm his heart for his children, and then I would ask him some questions like this. Paul, what have you been trying to stay in the marriage or to keep it together that's not working? What am I getting at? I'm trying to get at those behaviors that he might be doing because he's desperate. They make perfect sense to Paul. To threaten, to beg, cajole, list all of the ways that he's done really great in the last 5 weeks. Makes perfect sense because he's afraid. I'd be afraid. I know what it's like to be a pastor in ministry and be afraid of the pink slip conversation, right? Who do you go to when your marriage is falling apart and you're doing premarital counseling in your church? I know what that fear is like. And so I would align myself and I would encourage him, to stop doing the things that are pushing her farther out. Start doing the things that align himself with God. I'm going to pursue you regardless of what happens in the relationship. I'm going to do the things that I know work to make Dawn feel loved, regardless of the response. And I'm going to entrust this into the Lord. So, Dawn, could you keep your heart open? Paul, you're going to have a little bit of time when Dawn comes back in. What I'd like you to think about is, what could you say to her in speaker listener that would let her know specifically some of the behaviors that you've been doing that you know are pushing her farther out, that you've said to me you want to stop those because they're not healthy for you and they're not helping her, to just be able to verbalize those for her. Do you think you can do that? And you know, if a person's struggling, I give them a help with the conversation. This is so hard, but it's so good, right? I would help a husband. These are Russ words, but you need Paul words, okay? Oh, thanks, let me write. I've had guys go, oh, let me write that down. Is it okay if I read? Yep, you pray about it, and you can say it, it's okay. And then I bring them back in, face-to-face, speaker, listener. We just have an old remote. When you've got the remote, you've got the floor. You know this, right? You've done this before. And all they have to do is they have to feed back. So I would start with the most positive, right? I would start with Paul, because they're back together again. I would let him speak into his wife's life. All she has to do, she doesn't have to agree, defend. She doesn't have to all she has to do is, Paul, this is what I heard you say, and verbatim. Feed back to him what he said. Why? That shows that she's really listening. She shut off this part of her brain. Oh, here we go again. If I can repeat it back for Paul, here's what I heard you say. She doesn't even have to agree with what he said, right? She just needs to feed it back. But what's happening when she's feeding it back? She's heard it, and now she's feeding it back, and she's allowing an opportunity for the Spirit of God to say, I'm not done yet. You are my daughter. I will protect you in this. I wouldn't lead you into potential reconciliation without my protection. And the issue is, can Dawn keep her heart open for a little while so that as they work with really good help, they can both demonstrate. Why? Because we didn't get to the things that Dawn's doing to contribute to the marital distress, right? You got a list of them, right? All we want to do is to help them speak to each other about where they're at. And so then if there's consensus, even if you're still leaning out, I'm not sure. I don't have a lot of hope. And you're pretty hopeful. Now what do we do? If you're willing to try path 3, your manual has a reconciliation covenant that has a number of bullets in it. Actually, you can look at it later. We would do is you would just take it out of your manual and say, you know, if both of them agree to path 3, first of all, I would just affirm them. Don't spike the ball in the end zone. So this is like, touchdown. No, not touchdown right now. We got a first down, not a touchdown. I am so thankful that you guys put in the work that was necessary to come to this point. And where you've both agreed to path 3, the next step would be to look at this covenant, and let's just read the bullets. The covenant bullets are to protect both of them, their common agreements, so that they could take it to any marriage counselor and say, will you help us with this? We've already committed. We have a window of time for 6 months. We're going to work hard and trust that God will show up. At the end of the 6 months, which is what Dawn wants to hear, we still have a decision to make, right? Kind of make sense? So sometimes couples go through the 6 months, they work as hard as they can, and they make a decision to lean back in. Everything's not done, everything is not healed, but they feel enough connection to each other to go, we can keep taking 2 steps forward, 1 step back. That's the whole protocol. You're doing triage, you're doing first responder, and now we have to make sure that we have handed them off with a common covenant to the very best help available. Make sense? Okay. Bill, come on up and get responses. Great job, by the way. Again, let's give them a hand. They did an excellent job.
Because we work in family life, so often we're all about the marriage covenant, and we are, but we had a situation just like this about 3 years ago. And I remember my wife we were talking, kind of doing what we do, and she said, well, I'd like you to make a 6-month commitment. And in my brain, I'm going, 6 months? You know, we need to commit to your marriage. And so I kind of let her lead on that, and they both agreed to a 6-month commitment on it. And when we got out to the car that night, I said, what in the world was that? And she goes, well, for him, if you give him a 6-month commitment, he doesn't feel like he has to change. He doesn't see that as a window of change. If you say, you know, make a lifelong commitment. For the other person, for her in this case, if a 6-month commitment, she's literally hitting the pause button and willing to work on it for 6 months. So I think we have to kind of resist that temptation to go to the covenant, if that makes sense.
And 3.5 years later, they are still together.
Right. The purpose, well, it's a great observation. The purpose of 6 months is a little bit arbitrary. In our experience, 6 months is more than enough time for spouses to demonstrate their willingness and their ability to make some changes in the relationship to move it toward healthy. The reason 6 months or a limited time is important, it's important for her leaning out, realizing I'm not locking myself into the same old, it's not going to change. And the importance for 6 months for him, if he's serious about the relationship, he needs to get pedaling, right? He knows that he hasn't brokered an open-ended, maybe we'll get healthy, maybe we won't. They both have a common thing. We've got a limit. 6 months goes really quick when you're working on your relationship. Thank you. It's a great observation.
A hearty thank you for Dr. Rustberg, please. Thank you, brother. Thank you very much. You know, Gary and Cindy, chaplains here at Family Life, a big part of what they do for us is protect us and care for us. And so Gary just heard something that he thought really as a chaplain for RO staff particularly that needs to address. So Gary, if you will, let him address. I'll have a few closing comments and we'll be dismissed in a moment.
Yeah, because of the work we do, we've been cautioned by Crew Legal that we should never be using the word counseling. As RO staff, we are mentors, helpers, I often will use pastoral care because that's really not a counselor, but we should never be using the terminology therapy. We're doing therapy or we're doing counseling. So I just want to caution you all that are RO staff because we want to protect our organization. You will have no legal backing if you use that and you were ever sued. So I just wanted to make, because that's what we're talking about today. And I know there are other folks in here, but I wanted to caution you on that.
I want to thank you guys. It's been a blessing. Thanks to our staff that made this happen. Sean, Allison, Pete. I know that Jamie's out there, so is Rhonda. Couldn't have done it without the team. Your participation has been amazing. And look forward. Anyway, one short thing on what we do. I'm a director of local movements here at Family Life. And our focus is reaching people who are far from God and far from the church with the gospel. And the way we do that is we equip people to help people with their marriages and families. So if there's any way we can help you with that. Also, another thing that our team does, we help churches establish sustainable ministry to marriages. So either one of those things, feel free to reach out to us. Glad to help. One more time, Dr. Rustberg, let's give him a hand. You're dismissed.